Hi there. Welcome to episode 16 of Comic Art Live. And tonight is very special. We have a very special guest this evening. I'm joined by my usual compadres, but we are honored to have Ben Saunders here with us tonight. And Ben is there he is. Hi, Ben. Sorry, I called you Bill for a second, but you're a very handsome gentleman. At any rate, we're very honored because Ben is the curator of the Marvel exhibition, which is currently at the Ford Museum, and has been traveling throughout the United States. I saw it. I had the joy of meeting Ben and seeing it in Seattle, which was, I believe, the first iteration of the show.
Right. Yeah.
And I was stunned by, not just for the original art aficionados, by the depth and exciting art that you'll see there, but the way in which it is it works so well for kids and for adults, and there are statues that engage the children that come. There are costumes that engage adults, and it's just set up in such a fantastic way. And Ben, kudos to you and your team for creating such a wonderful space to tell the Marvel story. Really, I mean, that's kind of what you do. It's more than just the artwork. You really tell the history and story of Marvel in a way that is very easy to get. You know, I was blown away, and so you invited me there so that I would lend some stuff, and I was immediately smitten and basically ready to give you the kitchen sink. So, at any.
That's so nice to hear. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Has the kitchen sink come to your house yet? Do you have delivery arrive?
Slow right now, I hear. So
all right, it's there shortly. But Ben, do you want to talk about how you got involved with the exhibit, how that came to be? I mean,
sure.
I forgot to mention you're a professor at University of Oregon, is it?
That's correct. Yes. I'm. Well, that's really how it started. I'll try and give you the shorter version of it. There's a pretty good museum here at the University of Oregon called the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. We have a good campus art museum with one of the biggest rotating gallery spaces actually in the Pacific Northwest, and state-of-the-art climate control and security. And I had the idea of doing a superheroes art show initially back in 2009. I had just started teaching in the area of comic studies. I wasn't hired to do that, and I think no one who teaches comics at the university level is usually hired to do it. I was hired to teach Shakespeare and 17th century poetry. That was my main brief. That was what my first book was on. And I had become interested in doing more with. I'd always been a fan. I'd always been. I am a professor of English probably because of reading comics as a kid. That was. That's the first time I ever really had that experience of reading and falling into a page. You know, just going down the rabbit hole. Was reading a British reprint of a Spider-Man comic, actually Gil Kane and Romita Senior era reprint. It was the Sam Bullitt storyline, for those of you who may remember that one. That was the first I can remember reading a few years after it came out, because the reprints were 6 or 7 years behind. I'm giving you the long version of the story here, which is how I fell in love with the medium.
That's fine.
And so I was thinking I would like to do something with that, and I thought maybe I'd do a conference, an academic conference on the superhero, where you could bring in a lot of people to talk about why we find those kinds of fantasies appealing. And I thought there should be some art to accompany the conference if we're doing this visually oriented thing. So I went to see the folks at the museum here, and very quickly the curator at the time, Larry Fong, said to me, "Why are you thinking about this so small? Why this could be a really big show. This could actually be a Barker show, and it could, which is our biggest gallery." and it could run for a few months. And so I went from planning a small show attached to a conference to planning a small conference attached to this really big show. And I discovered comic art fans and started trying to contact people through that. Of course, no one knew who I was. So a lot of people didn't respond. Or, when some mysterious, when someone you've never heard of shows up in your inbox and says, will you give me this incredibly valuable object for 3 months? Most people naturally ignore you. But Ethan Roberts, God bless him, was the first person to write back and say that he'd be willing to lend. And I got on the phone with him. We talked for 4 hours in that first conversation. I mean, the phone got hot in my hand. It was, and in the end, Ethan said, "You just have to come out to Shaker Heights and take a look at the collection, because I don't have a list, so I can't tell you what you might want." He had been collecting since 1963 at that time. So I flew out. He met me at the airport. We talked all in the car all the way to his house. We just looked at art for hours. And at the end of the evening, he told me I could take anything I wanted for the show, which was mind-boggling. And then he gave me a John Buscema, Tom Palmer Avengers page from the second, the second time that team got together. Not the classic earlier run, but a little bit later in the run. I'd been talking about how much I love Buscema with Palmer, that I thought that was a great combination and not one that you saw a lot of. He just gave me the page. So obviously I was, pretty much walking on air after that encounter. And that show led to the big EC show that I did in 2016, which was the first time that I worked with Eric Roberts and Jim Halpern, both of whom loaned, and actually we had Glenn Bray, Eric Roberts, and Jim Halpern all as the sort of key lenders for that EC show. Several other lenders, but we could have had an amazing show just with those guys. Between them, you've got all the bases covered. Eric, a lot of the horror and the mad stuff. Glenn has all the Basil Wolverton you could ever want, and Jim has all the science fiction stuff. So between them, it was the I think it was the biggest gathering probably of EC original art since Bill Gaines had the auctions. Since the West Cochran auctions, and that was tremendous fun and got a lot of press. The guys from the EMP, as it was called at the time, now called MoPop, the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, came down from Seattle to Eugene to see that show, and then they asked me if I would curate something there. So it was. Up until now, I've just been doing it really as a kind of labor of love and to show the stuff to my student. If you bring these things to the campus, then I can build assignments and classes around what's in the museum, and the students get to see. I mean, if you're trying to describe original art, it's one thing, but if you can send students into a museum and say, "Look, it's this big," you could see the paste ups, you could see the pencils, you could see what's been erased. The traces of the artist's hand are just on the work in a different kind of way, and it's so much more. So that's the way it happened. I started doing these shows really purely out of enthusiasm, and knowing that we had this great resource of a great museum here and people at the museum who were imaginative enough to want to do this. Not every museum director would say, "Yeah, we can have a bunch of comic," especially not back in 2009 when I did the first one. The world's changed a little bit now.
One of the things I thought was really, really great when we walked into a MoPop in Seattle was, so first you had the great signage with like the Marvel superheroes. As we walked in the long stairway, there was like a huge statue of Hulk battling Thor. That was like the first thing that you saw. And then as you went up the stairs and winded around these like amazing statues, you came to a newsstand, like an old 1930s newsstand that would have had these comics and Captain America and you really set up how did you make it so interactive? Like, how did you come up with the idea to make it so accessible to the public like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm trying to think back. I wrote a script basically. I wrote an 80-page script for the entire show based on my fantasy about what I hoped we would find. Like just like I just like everything and a fantasy budget. I decided just not to. I just would just try everything that I could think of. And there's a gosh wow experience that statues will create in a museum environment. I mean, if you ever go to the Uffizi in Italy and you see Michelangelo's David, no, it doesn't matter how well you know that image from reproductions. There's something.
Yeah, I constantly when I was there, I constantly wanted to paint the Captain America star and on the David, but
yeah, exactly. Those kinds of experiences of being overwhelmed, right? That's what I wanted. I wanted a little bit of that, and at the same time, I wanted to always remind people that this starts with work on paper. That it starts with that these fantasies begin with an individual working at a drawing board, and to keep sort of moving between those two sets of ideas. So the spectacle of these fantasies at their most glamorous, and then to come back to this sort of the labor of the human hand. So the newsstand for me was how else does it begin? This is the first point of contact. Before there were comic book stores, the first point of contact for older comic book readers was the news. That was the comic book store. There wasn't anything else. So it'd be cool to just sort of remind people this is where where our connection to this stuff began for a lot of people. And then at the same time, it was an opportunity to talk about, we had that with a backdrop of New York on the other side.
Right.
And a quote from Kirby. These two great quotations. Right. I love, in particular, I love the Kirby one. I don't know where your brother comes from, but where I came from, everybody was an immigrant. And it was just, I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why it's good to be reminded of something like that, but to have that as a the reminder that one of the things that's distinctive, actually, I think, about Marvel, which is that they chose to place these characters. It's not Metropolis, it's not
world,
it's not Gotham. It's a space, and so that's the beginning. That was just but this is all a script. I wrote a long script just to actually answer the question you asked.
Right,
and I had a wish list. And some of the things were like, I wanted Jack's desk. Could we get the drawing board?
No, that's the one. I mean, I fell in love when I saw it because I mean, you took us through like sort of the beginnings of Marvel, and we saw some of the comics, and then I don't think you set it up for me like that desk was going to be there. But then
the desk isn't there. The desk isn't there. There is a desk.
No. I know it's not the desk.
Right.
But the fact that like you had a desk there and with like the Jack Kirby self-portrait there, and like as an honorarium to Jack's pencil as the creator, I was blown away by that touch.
It was a replacement for one of the only things I couldn't get, because when I was making this wish list, I was imagining how this would be laid out and staged. And I was thinking about original art and what I knew existed and what I didn't know existed, right? I was just sort of like, maybe this is out there, maybe it isn't. And I was also thinking a little bit like the producer of the show, Christoph Schulz, had said to me, he'd read a little bit, he'd just seen Guardians of the Galaxy, and he was very taken with the character of the Collector. And he said to me, what if the Collector could curate this show, what would the Collector put in the show? And I thought, well, Stan and Jack is what the Collector would do. He'd go back. He would actually just kidnap Stan and Jack and put them in some little, containment unit, some sort of comic book artist aquarium, and leave them in there. And obviously,
we've long wanted to kidnap Stan and Jack, but
exactly. Right. So obviously,
it's easier said than done.
And but the next best thing would have been to get his board, right? I knew that the art board had survived, so if we could get that, and Marvel asked if they could make the overture to Neil Kirby, I believe it's in his hands, because they didn't want me, again, somebody he's never heard of, just popping up in his mailbox saying, "Lend me this." So Marvel made the inquiry, and apparently he said he didn't want to lend. So which is his choice. So
Sure.
if we can't get that, let's recreate the illusion of a studio space, remind people this is how it started, and then put these pieces of Jack's work on the table, which we probably wouldn't have been able to do if we actually had the test. So yeah, it was I got something like 90% of what I was dreaming about. That was the part that I still can't quite believe. We found almost 90% of what was in my wish list, and people were willing to lend.
Well,
so,
I mean, go ahead, Will. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so Ben, we know you have original, and Glenn's absolutely right. It's an amazing display. I mean, I saw it in Philadelphia, your second stop, and was blown away. I mean, even before I spoke with you on the phone and could sort of visualize and was told about it, but seeing it in person, it's like, wow. And it tells a story. But can you tell us how, besides contacting collectors, original art collectors, you also had comic books, you also had costumes from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as well as props. I mean, what besides the creative script coming out of your mind, what else went into incorporating all these different elements that would appeal to not only the hardcore collectors like ourselves, but the broader audience?
Sure. So that was always part of the brief, right? The producers were in a way keeping me in check a little bit. I mean, if I could have done a show that was just original art, that's what I would have done. For me, that's where that's the most important stuff. But obviously, the general public, a lot of people are becoming interested in these characters because they've encountered them through the movies or through video games, or sometimes even nowadays still through comic books. And I wanted, obviously, I was trying to find some way to sort of, in a way you can't lose, right? The material is so hot right now that you'd have to really work hard to make people not interested in Marvel. But so that I had that on my side. I had, I just have great stuff that I'm working with, that stuff that I love and that a lot of people love. But the producers had already signed a licensing, was even in the room, that said that Marvel would grant access to, they could make reproductions from anything from the published archive. So any image that we wanted to reproduce, if we couldn't find an original, or if if the original is lost or whatever, we could reproduce anything we wanted. And they gave us access to Marvel Studios in terms of, we didn't fly down and look in a warehouse or anything. It was more, tell us what you want and we'll see if we have it. And sometimes they don't, or sometimes it's you see a prop in a movie and you think that looks fantastic, and then it's 85% post-production CGI, and the object itself doesn't actually really exist. So
Ben, should we have Bill, like, while you're talking about it, should we have maybe Bill, you want to take us through some of those pictures of the exhibit, and Ben can talk about a little bit about each and every one?
I was actually visualizing the Hall of Armor at the Franklin Institute as you were speaking, Ben.
yeah, and that was, my idea was, let's build, if it's Tony Stark and you're making a gallery, let's make the gallery like the lab. So that was in the script. But then in terms of what you can find, those pieces are, so two of those are set dressing, basically. The Mark I, that's a reconstruction. We went to the company, Marvel put us in touch with the company that actually made the armor for the first movie, and we just had them make it again for us. Because the actual armor we couldn't get. I mean, I don't know what happened. Maybe that, I don't know how much of it was fully constructed and how much of it was, but it's gone anyway. There was, Marvel didn't seem to have that for us, so they helped us out with that. And those other two are from background sequences in the movies. So we just set them up to create that illusion of being in the Tony Stark in the Tony Stark lab. And then, of course, opposite them on the other side of the wall, we've had different examples of original art. I think in the first version of the show in Seattle, We had the Gene Colan cover for Iron Man #1 opposite that from David Mandel's collection. Yeah, that one. And in more recently, we have some pieces from Eric Roberts' collection in that place. The alcoholism cover, the 128 cover, we have that there. And that's the thing, that the show has changed every single time. So that Iron Man cover is not currently in the show, but that fabulous Ant-Man cover is still there. Next to kind of a little sort of vitrine with an illusion of a tiny little Ant-Man running around across a desktop, which the kids love. The kids never look at the art; they just go right up to the little Ant-Man running around, which is created with like a mirror and projections. It's a very old-fashioned illusion. Something's Ghost. I can't even remember the name of it, but it's versions of this illusion have been around since the 19th century. It basically involves a light projector and a mirror to make something seem smaller or bigger. And so we made a little animated projection, and then we used this mirror to make it look like it's Ant-Man running around on a desk. And
That's fun.
Yeah. Now, Ben, I actually have not seen the show in person. It's in Detroit, so and I know it's there through the end of January. So I'm definitely planning on going there. I've got friends in the Detroit area, so we've already kind of chatted about doing it in December. But one of the things that, Glenn had sent me a lot of photographs when he took, from the show, and the thing that I kind of took from that was that it, rather than it being something like a chronological history of the Marvel universe and starting. And doing it that way, I really like the fact that it seemed like the sections were devoted to the characters. Like, the Thor armor, was next to a Journey into Mystery page, and so you weren't really like lumping all the art in this corner of the museum and all the statues over here and all the film pieces here. You were kind of you were telling a story character based about the Marvel universe and tying in those three elements, the art and the comics and the movie props. And, and I felt that was a way to make each character appealing to some facet of a person, whether it was a child or it was an adult or somebody who really didn't read the comics but appreciated the film. They're going over to see these Thor costumes, and they're kind of also being forced to learn that the original art was really what started you to get to this stage of what you're getting to enjoy on the screen. And so I really appreciated the fact that, and I can't wait. This is why I can't wait to see the show, is that you really did focus on the characters themselves as part of the story, not just, telling the story of Marvel Comics, in a general form. That would have been boring.
Yeah, it's a little, and I've tried to do. Thank you. I mean, I think that's the multimedia component of it, I think, is perhaps one of the more successful things about it. And this is the point where I should pay tribute to the designers. I have been so blessed for so many reasons to be able to work on this show, but one of them is I ended up working with this extraordinarily talented German design team who would take the ideas in my script and then actually turn them into three-dimensional conceptions, and of course the sculptures themselves were made by Gentle Giant, who just they do amazing work. And one of the reasons that I wanted to work with them was because I knew that they would know how to make three big life-size three-dimensional sculptures that were not attempts to look like the film properties. I didn't want a likeness of Mark Ruffalo still being recognizable in the Hulk. I didn't want. I wanted the characters to look like the comic book characters, but big and three-dimensional. This is the moment where I knew it was all real somehow when we were conceiving. Because this was one of the earliest ideas that I had, and I wanted. Came out of a conversation with Brian Crosby, who was using the phrase "Marvel in the world outside your window," and I was thinking about. I knew I wanted a sculpt. My original concept was a giant 3-dimensional Kirby machine with all 4 members of the Fantastic Four there. I wanted, Reed working on it with his arms stretching around to work on the machine. I wanted Ben standing there holding up something heavy. You know the images. And I wanted Johnny maybe sitting there reading a comic book, not paying any attention. And then I wanted Sue to be a projection, so she would phase in and out. She's not there, and she's there, and she's not there, and she's there. Yeah, that was the original. It probably would have cost, like $200,000 just to do that one bit of the show. And that was too expensive in the end. Basically, people
Right.
it wasn't going to happen. So we scaled back, and I kept thinking, well, what is it that we love about the Fantastic Four? It's that mixture of the cosmic and the quotidian. The fact that they go on these amazing journeys, but they're a family. And so what would be, if you have a sculpture like this, what would be better than showing, I don't want the thing breaking something or throwing a punch or in an action pose. I want him hanging out at home. So I had the idea that he would be asleep in front of the TV, and there was going to be a coffee table in front of him with a pizza box on it. The idea like this thing is falling asleep. And the window behind, which is animated, and all of these various other Marvel characters are kind of flying by in the background. So he's asleep and sort of missing the action that's going on behind him. That was the original concept. And then I got a couple of notes on that. One from the designers saying, we love the idea, but if you put a coffee table with a pizza box in front of him, people are going to bark their shins on it. Nobody's going to be able to walk up to him. We need to clear the space in front of him so that we get the photo up. So that was out. And then I got a note from Marvel basically saying they were worried that if he was asleep, he would look dead. And they didn't want people to think he was dead. So I thought, okay, put a book in his hand. And everyone's had the experience of falling asleep over a book. Then no one will worry that he's dead. And to my lasting thanks, look at that. Yeah, see, this is what everyone does. they get their picture with Ben.
Will, what about the social distancing thing, buddy? You're going to give him.
This was actually pre-COVID. This was the last night in Philly. I actually went back. I contacted Ben. I think I texted him and said, "Hey, I'd like to go back." And he's like, "Oh yeah, of course." So he set it up, and it was nice because opening night it was quite crowded. I mean, you were there, Glenn, and and this was the final night, which was still bustling, but not quite as crowded. And I didn't have family in tow, so I got to hang out with Ben. We chatted for a couple minutes, and
so
I took a picture.
You do mean Ben Saunders? You texted, right? Just want to clarify, you're not texting Ben Grimm or anything.
No. I texted Ben Saunders, but I chatted with Ben Grimm. You can say it. I mean,
all right, I believe it.
Proof is in the picture.
Proof
is in the picture.
Yeah. No, I love this. This was the thing that the thing. This was the moment that I was most. First of all, knew that the dream was true when I was talking on the phone. We'd got such back and forth as to what the final design would be, and then I'm on the phone with Brian Crosby from Marvel, and he says, "Okay, we're going to do it. We're going to let you, Gentle Giant, do this thing with the book. So you have to make some decisions about what kind of pants do you want him to be wearing." Yeah. There you go. You can see the animated window there. Yeah. That's the closest I've ever come to being able to write a script for Marvel, is writing the script for that window. But so I get this call basically saying, what do you want the thing to be wearing, the long trunks or the short ones? And I just had this moment of like, never in my life did I imagine that somebody would be asking me how long I want Ben Grimm's underwear to be for this. This is real. This is a real thing. And then standing in the show, I can stand.
Now, how long did you want Scarlet Witch's underwear? Just so
I think it is one of my favorite costumes in the history of Marvel Comics. It's a great costume. But we'll
talk about that after the show because I am curious.
Yeah. No, I sat and watched people just sit next to him, for about half an hour one evening, because that was just it's. I think one of the real high points of all this, when the show was in Philadelphia, there was a convention, and Jerry Conway and Walt Simonson went to the show. I wasn't there that day. I wish I had been. But there, a couple of days later in Walt's Twitter feed, there's a picture of him and Jerry sitting next to the thing like that.
Oh, nice.
And that was, I mean, these are two creators whose work has really, they got their fingerprints all over my brain when I was very young. The Death of Gwen Stacy was a traumatizing book for me.
Right. You were able to return the favor to them.
Yeah, it felt like it really felt like they looked so happy. They were just so happy to be there with him, And I guess that's one of the wonderful things about this hobby. Right? Sorry.
Yeah, Will's locked up again.
Will's frozen.
Oh, he's back.
Okay, unfrozen. Poof.
Oh.
No.
Hey, Ben, I was going to mention to you while Will is trying to get his completed. You mentioned about your first comic book was the Sam Bullitt issue. That's Spider-Man 91.
Yes.
Yeah, believe it or not, that's the first complete Spider-Man book I bought. I actually bought the original art to that whole book for $800 back in 1990. And I still have it. Yeah.
Oh God,
that's if you ever want to see it in person, I'll show you the actual originals next time we meet. Okay.
Yeah, I would love to see those. There's
phenomenal interior splashes in that story if you remember it too.
Oh yeah. I looked at it recently because I was thinking about people ask me where the point of contact was, and I think of that story, as being so
right after the Death of Captain Stacy issue, yeah.
And it's so brave what they were doing there, because it's a story about a dog whistling racist politician.
Exactly.
And initially,
even continues to the next issue, of course, with Iceman, if you remember.
Yeah, I do. No, I mean, part of that story is about J. Jonah Jameson has decided that he's going to support Sam Bullitt because Bullitt is anti-Spider-Man on this Law and Order platform.
Right.
But it turns out that Law and Order for Bullitt is just a dog whistle for racism, and he's exposed by Robbie Robertson. Joe Robertson has
that confrontation between Jameson and Robbie Robertson. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to do what's right, or are you going to do what sells papers? Right? Remember?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's an incredible moment, and Jameson realizes that he can no longer support Bullitt once Bullitt's racism has been exposed. Which I was looking at it and thinking, you see, even one of the biggest jerks in the Marvel universe, J. Jonah Jameson is like, the biggest jerk in the Marvel universe in a lot of ways. And even he knows you don't support the racists.
Every so often he has a little dose of morality, Yeah.
And they even use a racial slur. There's a moment where Bullitt refers to Robbie as Sambo. Yeah, they actually use that word. And I was reading this and thinking, and this is Stan. This is one of the things that Stan at this point, it's in the soapbox a lot as well. This sort of general appeal to.
And think about it. This is right before the drug issues too. Talking about racism like that. That was pretty intense, and that doesn't get a lot of talk about those issues. And that really was a big fight against racism at the time. Yeah.
No, I think it's braver in some ways than the drug issues, right? Because the drug issues, they took it wasn't like they were saying, "Hey kids, psychedelics will shake you up and God, and you'll be more creative or whatever." I mean, it was like drugs are bad, don't do drugs. That's basically so it exposed the foolishness of the code that anyone would object to what was in the end. Such a well within the mainstream approach to a drug story.
Sure.
But the treatment of racism and the relationship between racism and politics in those previous issues, that is a lot more courageous. And they took and it's a stance that I believe. Well, that is a moment where there's a lot of critical things that people can say about. Sure. Stan, and they're not necessarily wrong. Stan is actually, like all human beings, he's a complicated figure, but in his attitude towards issues of race, he's willing to use the platform to take an unpopular stance.
And I was even going to say, even at that same time, think about it, if we remember, Fantastic Four 119. Remember, Black Panther's in it, and they show Ben Grimm doesn't understand. Black Panther's showing him, look, and they have bathrooms for whites, bathrooms for blacks. Remember, and the thing says, and he destroys the building, remember?
These are, I think, actually, just the introduction. I mean, you could really, what about the introduction of the Black Panther in 1966?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Actually,
Right.
a couple of months before the Black Panther Party was founded by Bobby Seale in it's actually a couple of months earlier, which has always made me wonder about the use of the Panther image. There are prior uses of it in civil rights literature. Stokely Carmichael had a Get Out the Vote campaign for where was it? It's it's the Southeast, and it's not necessarily an area. It's Mississippi. And Stokely Carmichael was a member of an organization that was using a Black Panther as a symbol, but that literature was probably never distributed outside of that area. So there's no reason to think that Stan and Jack would necessarily have seen it or have known about it. But Stokely Carmichael then brought some of that literature to the West Coast, and that's probably how Bobby Seale saw it. But still, it's a wonderful sort of cultural coincidence that the Black Panther appears on the newsstands for the first time at that pivotal moment.
Well, and think about how revolutionary also the Black Panther was for 1966. He's this, black, good-looking Sidney Poitier type hero that is not the king of Harlem. He's not, he's the king of this highly technological society. More advanced than the one you're living in, and I mean. That's pretty revolutionary stuff for 1966.
They waited 6 more years for Power Man for that.
Yes, that's right. We had to wait.
For the King of Harlem, your reference.
Right.
Different character, different time.
Yeah. Which a character I also love and really wanted to have material in the show. Actually, I love Luke Cage, and you guys would know better than me. I asked a lot of people about the location of the cover of the first issue because that's a Romita Senior piece that I particularly love.
That's a very iconic piece. Was that in auction? No,
that was in Heritage. That was in Heritage 2 sessions ago, I think.
It was the original, right?
Yeah, I think
because I didn't. No one, when I was putting the show together, no one I spoke to knew where that was.
Well, it hadn't popped out. I mean, literally. That auction a few months ago, right? I think it was wasn't it like the March auction? It was right as COVID hit, and people were wondering if that was going to affect the auction and the overall prices, and that piece did very well. It did north of 150.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. They had the stat version and the original version.
Right. There's a bigger version. I don't know if you saw it, Ben. There's a bigger version.
Whoever has that piece, if they're watching, I would love to exhibit it. I mean, I would. I would dearly love to.
Bill's gonna find it. Bill's gonna find it. There we go.
Yeah.
There it
went for 156.
And do you have the stat version too, Bill? I think the stat version looks really cool with it also. The other version that shows the stat portion of it. If you bring up the auction, they show the other with all the logo and everything with it. It looks pretty cool. If you click below, it might show the other. There it is.
Yeah, there it is.
There you go.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, that's the one I said. With the that's the stretch.
So that's completely stat. Like what they did was they reduced.
But they added a few odds and ends. I mean, I think in production.
Yeah, but so the original drawing was larger, and they shrunk it down to fit the logo in and everything. And
right.
And Ben, just so you know, I mean, I don't know where the cover came from, but the story, pages 2 through, 19 or 20, was actually up in Canada. Because I used to own the page 1 splash. I bought it at a little convention in New York, and I had heard a rumor that the rest of the pages were together, and it turned out to be true. I didn't get in contact with the guy, but somebody had pages 2 on, and then the page 1 popped up, at a New York show. So it's interesting how these things sort of travel around and get separated and back together.
It's a great relief to know that that has actually, in fact, survived. I was, there. I mean, what's lost and what isn't, and what may show up. These are the emotional effect it can have on me. The first time I saw a Ditko Spider-Man cover, I teared up a little bit. I actually, and it took me by surprise that I was having such an emotional reaction to it. And I realized it was partly because it was the ultimate reminder of this as a made thing, and not. I mean, when I first went to New York City, I was 25 years old, and I had grown up reading about New York in Marvel Comics, and it was 1993, and I knew that I wasn't going to see Spider-Man out of the corner of my eye, right? I mean, I was old enough to realize, I was 25, I wasn't expected to see him, but I couldn't stop looking. There was part of me that was just like every now and again, and I felt this genuine disappointment in a way that I was in New York, and I wasn't there, and there wasn't a Baxter Building, and I wasn't going to see, Spider-Man's up there, no matter how hard I looked, And so it made me realize some part of me always wanted it to be true, even though I was long after the point of ever, believing it. And I think when I saw that cover, it was a similar thing. It was like the last sort of vestigial holding on to the idea that this, just realizing, this weird, Ayn Rand libertarian guy working by himself in his studio, putting every line down on the page. It came out of Steve Ditko's head and hand, and it lodged so deeply in me that I want it to be more than that. But here it is. Here's this beautiful object. So I was moved by the beauty of the object, and I was also really aware at some level, I think, of the that this is it. You don't get any closer to the reality of these fantasies than this stuff.
I think that's what we all really love about the original art is that it is imperfect, and when you look at it, you recognize the artist's creation behind the piece. It's by the time it's printed and it's colored, it loses some of that authenticity, and so it sort of scales the illusion back and brings you to reality of the artistic nature of the piece. And so okay, so here we have a page of Amazing Fantasy 15.
Yes, that was just the first few months of the very first show. It was traveled by courier from DC to Seattle. So just bringing that piece I think it cost $25,000 just to bring it. And it was they would only let us show it for the first 3 months of the run. But they did let me have they let me have my pick of a page. And I chose the page. I wanted the whole thing, actually. They wouldn't let me have the whole thing. So I chose that page because it's the first costume. That's the first appearance.
Right.
And I used to, the rare opportunities that I had to curate in front, I would stand in front of it and point out to people, there is a moment in the history of the world where that drawing of Spider-Man in costume is the drawing of Spider-Man in costume. Now, you think of the number of times that image has been reproduced, the fact that he's a globally famous, iconic, the dynamic icon. But there was a moment when Steve is working on that where that's it.
Right.
And you're looking at the piece of paper that he drew it on.
It would be interesting to know if he drew the pages sequentially, or whether because he must have designed. We know he designed the costume on another piece of paper, but it would be interesting to know the first panel that he drew in costume. It likely is this page, but I guess we won't know for certain.
I guess he would have done it. Yes, there would have been a design sketch, I'm sure, which I don't know if anything, but Ditko doesn't seem to be somebody, Ditko's no sentimentalist, right? And I'm not sure who knows what may have been in deep down in that archive. But he doesn't strike me as the kind of artist who would necessarily keep a concept sketch once he was moving on. Whereas there are other people who, one of the remarkable things about Romita Sr. Is that he does seem to have kept his concept sketches, and so they show
he's kept everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just want to show you on the page 1. There's a little Spider-Man drawing right there. That I don't know if you've seen the original, but that's hand drawn on the original.
Oh, it is? I have not seen it yet. I've seen a reproduction of it, but I have never gone to it. Yeah. Okay. Now that would have been, is that logo pasted on, or is that?
Yeah, it is pasted on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he did another logo underneath, and then they decided to change it.
Oh yeah, the other logo. I didn't lift. The curator lifted it up for me, and I was able to take a picture. And the other logo, the Spider-Man lettering, it's very spindly, almost like webbing or arachnid legs, but it's very spidery.
Right.
And there's just like a segmented nature to each letter.
You could totally imagine how that conversation went, right? I mean, Steve does that, and Stan is like, "That's too much," like that's too weird.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was out there. It was when she's like, "I don't want to lift it up anymore. It's just a little loose."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was like creepy looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
I mean, heroic.
The part of the fantastic thing about the way that they worked together, even though there was great tension between them, by the end of their relationship, was that you really do get the sense of two people pulling in quite different directions artistically, and that the result, while the tension holds, the result is just perfect. You just really get this it's a sort of a sweet spot in the middle that they're kind of getting to, and it was inevitable that it wouldn't last. Temperamentally, they just couldn't. They seem like more different human beings than could you have more different people than Stan and Steve? There's a guy who never turned down an interview, and a guy who would only ever answer your questions if he could completely control the discursive space. He'd type you an answer, but he's not going to let you get into some back and forth conversation. And Stan is obviously, as we were talking about the racism thing, this guy is a loosely liberal figure in terms of his expressed politics. Ditko is this Ayn Rand libertarian. Stan wants to be contemporary. There's a way in which he's using that sort of faux hipster DJ kind of language, and Steve was still drawing people in the 1990s as if it was the 1950s. There's like a Ditko's sense of Ditko has no interest in fashion. It's like fashion stopped in 1957. and all of those things that separately, you get this. It's so lacking. With Stan, it's a little too glib. It's a little too charming. There's not enough content. But Steve without Stan, for me, is, I know there are Ditko fans who prefer everything he did by himself, but there it is. Whoa! Wow! I've never seen that.
You found a better one than I was showing you, Bill.
Well, you could thank Ray Cuthbert for that.
Oh, yeah.
And that Spider-Man image is all drawn there.
It looks like it, actually. I thought it was I thought it was pulled up, but it looks like it's right on.
I'm pretty sure it was. I know it had whiteout all around it, but I'm pretty sure it was drawn. I mean, I got within about 3 or 4 inches of it and stared at it for probably 10 minutes.
Wow, that logo's awesome underneath. Wow.
Yeah, and that whiteout is more webbing that I'm pretty sure that he was talking about.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, so in your exhibit, again, what wowed me is as we got to the Spider-Man section, you had the death of Gwen Stacy pages in the exhibit, and then right after that,
Eric Roberts has been so generous. Now that you mention this, I have to say thank you, Eric. Right? I mean,
thank you, Eric. Exactly.
Yeah, no, he was a cornerstone.
Because it was a euphoric moment, and then right after that was a statue of my favorite Spider-Man hanging upside down that you could take a picture with. So
yes.
Toby's your favorite?
People were kissing it.
Is that Toby?
Isn't that Toby?
There I am. And Spider-Man too. Yeah, it's me and Spider-Man.
I don't think people are kissing it anymore. But a lot of people. But you can maybe see the fingertips have started. How the red has started to fade a little. Because so many people would touch the. It's like a. Again, if you go to Italy and you look at a statue of a saint or something, and the toes have been worn smooth because everybody is touching the statue and to get a blessing. That's how people were approaching these sculptures. They wanted to touch them, and the paint comes off enough times.
That's a beauty.
That happened, Ben, with the Ben Grimm statue.
Yeah.
The couch, you probably know this. They had to repair the couch, I noticed, because so many people sitting down, it had completely worn out, and they had to reupholster the couch. So when I went there on the last day, it was like a new patch had been put on, and I kind of wondered, since that exhibit had been there several months, was this the first, the third? How many patches have they gone through?
I think that's the first I've heard of them repatching the couch, but they've had to repaint Ben between every show.
Okay. Probably the arm gets probably rubbed off the paint, I bet.
Yeah, people put their hand on his knee, on the thigh where they're sitting next to him.
Yeah, I got accused of being handsy, but people don't realize his thigh is like up under your ribs. It's like pretty.
No, you're handsy.
You wouldn't know that, Mike.
I got to go along with Mike here, Will.
Little handsy there, Will.
Are you guys spying on me or something?
You're like a little thigh happy there, Will.
Okay.
The proof is in the picture, my friend.
I just wanted to make sure he was really stoned, and he's stoned. I can tell you. No, his thigh is like up under your rib cage almost. It's like pretty tall.
Do you have those Death of Gwen Stacy pages, Bill? I think I sent you pictures of those too, and some of the other.
Sorry, let me see which one. I've got a lot of them here.
Just for the record, I know people know. I actually sold Eric that whole story, but it is what it is.
All right, so you've got the you got that.
Great.
Yeah, that cover.
You also had like the I thought I sent like the sequence of pages where
we do. Yeah, we have the last 3 pages of 121 and the cover of 122.
I mean, the cover is amazing, so it's great to see that. But really, what I spent more time than I thought I would just looking at the 3 sequential pages of her death, and you were talking about getting emotional from artwork. That's where I was really kind of like choked up, because that I was 12 years old when I read that story, and that really launched my excitement for the medium also.
Terry Moore told me that he threw that book out of a car window. He was so disgusted and upset.
Right. I was very upset too. I thought for sure they'd bring her back. I was like, this is like killing Lois Lane. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. No, my mother told me she'll be fine next week. I actually can remember it. So it's like an early lesson in not trusting your parents reading this stuff.
Right. And then
the dog really ran away. It's fine. It really ran away.
I almost think it was like killing Lana Lang. See, because like they were competing, so you had to kill the less interesting of the two. That's why John Romita always said they had to do Gwen, because Mary Jane, you could write her into more stories than Gwen,
But Gwen was like was his love, was like his girlfriend. Yeah. That's like why I say it's like killing Lois. Like MJ at that point was like already sort of like moved to the side. She was, sometimes dating Harry, and she wasn't like the focal point. I mean, at that point, if you envisioned yourself as Peter Parker when you were a kid, Gwen was your girlfriend. So.
Right. But God, like John Romita says, like from Milton Caniff, they said that that was the one that would get the biggest wow factor of a death.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, like from a story point of view, it makes total sense. I mean, but it doesn't stop me from hating Conway and Romita Sr. for a long period of time.
I do think, it's one of the turning points in the history of the genre, of the superhero genre, I think. And I mean, this is, again, I want to make sure that I'm giving the shout out to Eric and to everyone else who's loaned to the show. Besides, Will and Glenn themselves have been hugely generous, but Albert Moy has got. I mean, he's got a very deep collection, and he's
Sure.
really terrific pieces.
And Chuck Costas also.
Yeah, Chuck Costas has been a very generous lender, and I'm going to feel bad if I don't remember everybody now. But
Jim Halpern was also in there.
Jim has been such a supporter of my show. Jim has, to my knowledge, has never attended one of my shows, but he loaned the.
He assures me it's not personal, so don't worry.
He loaned the Frazetta cover that the EC Frazetta cover, the famous.
Wow.
Without ever having met me, he loaned that and a couple of complete Wally Wood stories and some incredible covers to my EC show in 2016. And I was just like, please come and please go. We'll put you up and we'll buy you a nice dinner at the very least, and you can see this on the walls of the museum with the other collections. He was just too busy.
Sure. Well, and the other thing that's like wow factor, that since we're talking about Halpern, is like as you walk into the show, you've got that Human Torch Schomburg cover.
Yeah, the Marvel Comics 1 page. That's the one.
Right, and that too. Yes.
That used mine. Yeah, that was awesome.
Do we have pictures of that too? I think did we show that already?
Which one?
The Human Torch one, yes.
Yes, the Torch one is, and I believe that is that, you guys would know better than me, is that the only...
That's the only Marvel superhero existing
Schomburg.
The only timely era Schomburg. Okay, yeah, that's, so
I always thought there was another one that existed. I always thought there was one more that existed.
Another Marvel Schomburg?
I could swear there was. I'll have to try and see if I can figure out. I could swear there was just one other.
It might be one of two, or maybe it's the one. There is a.
But it's a rarity.
Schomburg, yeah, because he did a lot of those recreations later, right? I had one of his paintings, one of his later paintings in my first show. Which also look great. They look fabulous, but obviously
we're not even discussing the Captain America cover, which is right next to it by Jack Kirby,
which is
amazing. Also,
yeah, Jack Kirby and two characters that he created. I mean, this is the thing that I'm always trying to get across to people when they visit the show: is we don't just have great original art. We have, whenever possible, the first artists to create and design these characters. I wanted examples. This goes back to the first show that I did when, I was imagining this sort of Batman wall, and we have, who knows how many thousands of artists have done licensed images of Batman over the years. It must be, thousands of artists. But if you wanted to name 5 artists who have really changed or determined the conception of that character, being the model that other people, you can do it. You can think of the 1,000 artists, and then you can think of between 5 or 10 who set the standard for a decade as to what those characters are supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And I thought, so for Batman, I want to have one example from 5 artists like that, right? And so it's obviously you want Bob Kane for obvious reasons, and then I was thinking I wanted Dick Sprang because that 50s look is so important. And then you got to have Adams, and then you got to have Miller. And we did it. We put together. I did this for Superman and Batman to try and sort of come up with like the representative artist for each decade. And in the case of the Marvel show, so often what it really means is you need all the characters drawn by Kirby at least once, right? Right. Except for Spider-Man, who he always struggled with. Jack seems to have had a really hard time. I love that they can't just swap characters, even though they're doing these great crossovers. Ditko's Dr. Doom in Spider-Man 5 isn't really the same Dr. Doom as Kirby's Doom.
Right.
He's menacing, but he's not operatic. And
he's a little skinnier. He's like weak in the knees.
Although the one place I'll say that really works in an interesting way is the Hulk. When Ditko does the Hulk,
yes,
it really works in his own way. And when Kirby does the Hulk, it really works obviously, as the creator, and he's menacing like Frankenstein. But Ditko's Hulk in that one issue is pretty fantastic. I
think that's true. Well, they both understand. They both have different perspectives on what it means to be isolated and a loner. So they get that. And I think Kirby's feels more misunderstood. And frankly, I think Ditko's feels angrier. And it does take a little while for them to read. I mean, the Hulk's an odd character from that point of view. It's a few years since I reread the really early stuff, but when you think about the sort of established mythology of these characters now, the Hulk is an id monster and it's about anger. But for a very long time early on, that isn't obvious. Stan hasn't quite decided what triggers the change. Maybe it's because it's night.
At first, he changes at night, right?
Yeah, he changes at night. Right, yeah. And they haven't quite decided how much control he loses when he does. He's quite articulate.
And then he can fly.
Yeah. They're just like, you read it now and looking back at it, I'm just like, they're just making it up as they go along. But it's, that's part of the charm, of course, is that they're making it up as they go along. And they're testing things out, deciding what works and what doesn't. And I think
they canceled it after 6 issues,
Yeah.
Canceling it so early too,
Yeah.
I think when they started to go with sort of like Kirby's gut, his inclination, that's when they were really sort of on just the way that like when they revived Captain America, the telling moment that he's really sort of a Kirby direction, Kirby creation is that like he's suffering from PTSD syndrome that Kirby like was suffering from World War II, that that missing Bucky is like the guilt of letting Bucky die is what drives the character at that moment, and Jack allowed to sort of like throw his angst from World War II into Captain America, and a man in another time is like really what I think makes that character work and what's really special about it.
I think that's right.
Not just the idea that like that Martin Goodman said like throw Captain America in there. We need
I was just rereading those because I was writing a piece about it and thinking about 2 things actually. I should credit Glenn Gould because he was the first person who really made me aware of the extent to which 60s Cap isn't potentially an expression of Kirby's own war trauma. I hadn't really made that connection, and I had a conversation with Glenn David Gould about it once, and then he wrote a terrific piece on this for the Kirby catalog that I put together with Charles Hatfield when Charles did that great show at Cal State Northridge.
That was a great show, yeah.
And so Glenn Gould was really helpful to me in seeing that. But the other I think it's also part of Stan and Jack's genius was to steer into the skid, right? They had this. They brought back the Submariner, and he just fitted into. He was always the crankiest of the timely heroes. So when you're creating the Marvel universe, and they were already leaning into the idea of this hero as outsider and maybe sometimes not a hero, maybe an anti-hero or a reluctant hero. Namor just drops into that, and you don't have to change him. He fits
right.
But with Cap, it was kind of like, how does it's World War II. I mean, think about how irrelevant in some ways the version of the World War II soldier looked in the post-nuclear age.
Right. Well, just the idea of Captain America in existence in the 60s.
Yeah.
It makes no sense whatsoever.
And everything about what he represents. I mean, one thing that everybody knew in the early 60s when we were worried about extermination through nuclear holocaust, at the height of the Cold War and with the threat of the bomb, the thing that everybody knew is that wars were no longer going to be won by foot soldiers. Mm-hmm. And so the version of heroism that Cap represents is out of date. He'd been gone from the newsstands for nearly a decade, which is, like an eternity in comics time. And
And he's costumed in the flag, which people are burning at the time.
Wearing the flag, which people are not so increasingly through the 60s, that's going to be a problem. And the Marvel Universe features all of these. You know, you've got reluctant, angry rock monsters, and you've got the sort of Jekyll and Hyde Frankenstein thing with the Hulk. You've got Norse gods and technologically enhanced millionaires. You know, where does Captain America even fit in that? And they realized that was the way to do it. He doesn't fit, and he's constantly going to be telling you, "I'm not sure if I fit here. You know, what is my place in this this universe?" They turned their problem into the solution. It's a wonderfully creative way of dealing with that difficulty, and it gave Cap this psychological depth, which as a propaganda character.
Right. I mean, he obviously doesn't have that in the 40s and the 50s, although he is interesting. He's interesting in the 50s.
He is, but self-doubt is not his thing. You know, I mean, the when you read Golden Age Cap, there's never a moment where he stops and asks himself if he's doing the right thing. And so yeah, I thought it was, you know, I was just reading it again and thinking, this is really so smart. It's so intelligent because people wanted the character back, but they don't want it. And they think they want old Cap back. I actually think this is the mistake of Steranko's 3 issues. I know they're going to, you know, heretical to pretend criticize those great. Those Steranko's 3 issues of Captain America look amazing. And the reason that and at the time they looked really contemporary. They look really 60s now, but you know, it was like this was the freshest visual look. But his approach to the character is really small c conservative. What he wanted to do, because Steranko remembered the war material and he wanted that version of Cap back. He didn't want psychologically whiny and wounded Cap. He didn't want Cap going on about Rick Jones about Bucky all the time. So he decides to bring in Rick Jones as the substitute. He said, "That'll do. Stop worrying. You got a Bucky now." He wanted to recreate the emblematic American soldier, and visually it works. Like all those double-page spreads and full-page spreads of Cap, you know, lifting the Hydra guys up above his head and just sort of emerging from the rabble. They're incredibly designed propaganda pieces. They make you feel the nationalistic pride in the great American hero. But it's not the Cap that anyone else wanted in 1968. And you have within 2 issues, Stan reverses everything that Steranko does in those 3 issues. He gets rid of Rick Jones's Bucky and instead brings in the Falcon. You know, and you have your first African American superhero in the Marvel Universe at that point. And there it is. Yeah, we had it at the show. That's a piece of Jim's. And again, I hope he never asks for it back because it's such a historic piece. It means so much to be able to say to people, that's the first cover appearance of the first African American hero in the Marvel Universe. Yes, there's the Black Panther, but he's African. Here is your, here is an American hero of color. It's just a wonderful thing to be able to show people. I got all excited.
You can't say it now. You really listen. There's nothing. If people haven't seen this show, if they haven't been to it, I mean, there's really, as eloquently as you describe it, Ben. It seeing it is the only thing that'll do it justice. Because even like the Hall of Mirrors with Doctor Strange, and you kind of get turned around in there, and I mean, it's just so much.
Bill, why don't you just quickly take us through like a bunch of those pictures, throughout the exhibit, the Thor stuff and the costumes.
Oh, that was a fun one. I didn't know whether that headpiece was CGI or not. I wasn't sure how big it would actually be, and then when it arrived, we had this is that going to fit in the case? Because it did.
Right.
She wore that. That's what that means. She actually wore that.
She's got good balance.
Yeah. Blanche is just amazing. I think she's amazing in that.
You ever tried to pick up that hammer and see if you're worthy, Ben?
I never had the nerve. No.
Right.
I have an unboxing video of the Iron Man helmet when it arrived from the Mark I. I was at the museum the day that arrived, and it was very cold outside, and we're opening up this box, and there was all this straw and packing material where it wasn't actual straw, I guess, but it looked like straw. And I uncovered it, and there was the Mark I helmet, right? And I touched it, and it was cold. And I thought, oh my God, is it actually made out of metal? And then I lifted it up, and it weighed less than a bucket, of, a kid's seaside sand bucket, because obviously it's made out of plastic. And they just made it look like metal. But it was a moment where the illusion completely fooled me.
Right.
Very cool.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, there's
I'm
Lockjaw.
rolling.
Yeah,
I don't remember Lockjaw in Philly. I don't remember Lockjaw.
No, Lockjaw was gone for Philly because for a variety of reasons, I think Marvel didn't want people taking photo ops with it. They didn't want that. That's a prop that's something Marvel made to promote the not terribly successful Inhumans TV show.
Humans.
And Marvel didn't want people damaging it. So we had to put those things around it, and we decided in the end, if people can't take a photo with it, we'll just leave it out. And it's always a space issue from show to show as well.
And you had more space in Philly than Seattle, correct?
Yes, Philly I actually think was the biggest footprint for the show that we've had. Seattle was quite tight. There were moments where it felt more. I wanted the art to be able to breathe more, and in Philly it really did.
When you get to the point of the exhibit where you reach the Hulk statue, there's the I just remember the Avengers 57 cover, and then at the end of the hallway there's the Hulk statue that's huge. It's like 10 feet tall. People take pictures there, and then there's like a short hallway and up the ramp and steps, and then it's like part 2 of the exhibit. It was almost like it was the halfway point. I was like, whoa, there's a whole nother. Yeah. And there was so much more. It was. I mean, I didn't go to Seattle, but I mean,
Seattle was smaller, but they were very different. Like Seattle was like more intimate in a way. The thing just sort of like it didn't have a halfway demarcation. It just kind of kept going. And
yeah, and it was, and they're very differently conceived museums. I mean, the joy of working with Seattle in a way is that there's the curious nature of the space. It's not built like a box. It's quite an artistically designed building.
Yeah, no, it's great building.
And you have to think differently about how you work in a space like that. It changed some concepts from the show came from the space. When we had Daredevil, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, I was thinking of them as street level superheroes. And there was an area in Seattle that was like a corridor, more like a street. And I thought, well, we could create this street design here for these characters. Those are both from Eric's collection. I remember as a child trying to draw that Avengers cover myself, lying on the floor trying to recreate it. I just thought it was so powerful, not realizing that it is actually itself an homage to a Jack Kirby image, Jack Kirby vision.
Are they going to put your version of the cover at the next show?
I'm afraid that's a lost. That's a grail. It's out there. Somebody will track it down.
Somebody is not going to release that one. The Surfer 1 cover.
Yeah. I mean, what can you say? Words fail me on both. I love the. Now that Thanos is a much bigger deal to people outside of comic book fans, that seemed also like a particularly nice Captain Marvel cover.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And it has the vellum overlay on it, which is also really cool.
So the Surfer that years ago when a friend owned it, I don't believe it had the logo on it. Memory serves me.
No, I owned it. It never had a logo. Yeah, but the logo looks good on it.
Yeah.
And the Avengers 57 for me is a little bittersweet because it's the one that got away. I had I had about a 12-hour window to buy it, and it would have completely cleaned me out. And I couldn't do it in good conscience at the time. I
never had these. the closest I might have come to something like that, I suppose, is when I was going to conventions in the 80s, and seeing things like, I remember, seeing Dave McKean covers in the, when he was doing things in boxes in the early 90s. I remember seeing, there were Frank Miller was selling Dark Knight pages, and Dave Gibbons was selling Watchmen pages at the UK Comic Art Convention in 1986. But I showed up at those things. I wanted to buy comic book. I mean, I don't know if I would have had enough money, even at the, what now seem like the very low prices for which you could pick those things up.
Yeah, they were a few $100s back then. I mean, even in the early 90s, Dark Knight pages were 700, 900, 1,000 maybe.
Yeah, I imagine I could probably have, at the original moment of sale, blown everything I had for the weekend on the one thing. And I just couldn't do that. I was still tracking down comic books, and I could get 15 comic books, or I could get this one page.
It's a big leap.
Your Amazing Fantasy, your actual issue of Amazing Fantasy 15 is also in this show.
It is. That's the most valuable book I own, obviously, and it's a real beater. It's a very poor condition copy, but I picked it up a couple of years before my daughter was born. That was when I could occasionally, drop an amount of money that large on a comic book. I think I spent just under $2,000 on my Amazing Fantasy 15, and my wife was quite upset with me. and I
think you could sell it for more now. I think your wife will be all right now.
Yeah, I know now. I think it's yeah. But I carried it around with me in my work bag, bagged and boarded and protected. I carried it around in school for about 2 or 3 days and showed anyone who'd look at it, because I couldn't believe it.
Look like a beater. Look at how much color is on that thing.
It's very dry, and it's good. So the interior pages are very brown. That's the white that you can see there is actually the that's, what's that paper called? The stuff the paper you put in the books to stop them from aging.
Right, rice. Well, right, yeah, rice paper, right?
Yeah, whatever. I forget.
You're talking about the deacidification that stops the deacidification.
Yeah. I slipped a little bit of that in there just to stop things from getting any worse. But it's intact. The spine is split top and bottom, but the staples are still attached. I mean, really, I just wanted no writing on the cover, and I wanted a complete book, and I wanted the cover attached. So that was kind of like my threshold. And the Fantastic Four one,
it's nice that the edges are like a little scruffy. A book like that shouldn't look like came off the newsstand. It should look like an artifact. Yeah,
that's some serious chipping we've got going on there. I think that must have been pretty late in the run. The blades.
Yeah, a lot of them are chipped. Yeah. No, it presents well. It looks fine in the display.
Yeah. It does. Anyone would be proud to have that book.
Well, I also don't slab, so that's the other thing that one of the reasons I decided in the end to use it. I didn't want a lot of comic books, because that's one of the things that people think they're going to see when they go to a comics related show, and the books are very small, and they don't. I wanted original art, the costumes, which are overwhelming. The sculptures, I wanted more of that. If there's art, I wanted it as much as possible to be original art. But a couple of key books to remind people what this looked like, and that have the aura of being a valuable early book, I wanted. So I wanted a Marvel Comics 1. Actually, one of the hardest things to track down, and I should now thank Kelvin Williams for lending us that. I was in touch with a lot of people who almost were willing to lend and then wouldn't. I think it's a little different between comics collectors and art collectors. Actually, art collectors, I think, instinctively understand that this stuff looks good on a wall. They want to see it displayed. Comic book collectors, your instinct, and I am a comic book collector. My comics are all bagged and boarded in acid-free boxes in the coldest room in the house. With no windows. It's like that's where they live.
Right.
And the instinct of the comic collector to display is not quite the same, I think. So very lucky when I had was Jim Halpern again actually put me in touch with Kelvin, and Kelvin was willing to lend his copy of Marvel Comics 1, which I really wanted in the show because I wanted it next to Jim's original page. I wanted people to see,
Right.
Here's the book. Here's the only surviving page that we know of from the book. That's, again, I could talk about wish list. I can't believe it happened. And it almost...
No, I mean, it was over, like, honestly, like when I went to, I was overwhelmed by the show. I mean, it just, I went in thinking, like, I've seen a lot of art as an art dealer and as a collector for many, many years. And I feel like I've had the fortune to really look at like some special things. Just going to Seattle and Philly, was just, it was mind blowing and emotional and, better than any museum experience I'd ever had. And that includes, the museums that I saw in Europe and in New York. And I mean, obviously it's tailored for me, which I thank you for, by the way. But,
well, any comics fan is the ideal audience member for the show, right? I mean, the idea is and whatever your entry point is, if you're an enthusiast, if it's the Netflix TV shows, we had Daredevil costumes and Jessica Jones material. If you read Marvel Comics now, we had contemporary material. If you are fundamentally a Silver Age person, we had some great Silver Age original art. If your memory of Marvel is the Hulk TV show from the 1970s, which for a lot of people, that was a thing, that was the show. We have a monitor playing the sad man, the lonely man music, and showing the title sequence. Or for the Spider-Man animated cartoon of the 1966, we have that on a monitor, and we have a couple of cells from Robert Klein, another collector who I realize now I didn't mention. God, I really hope if anyone's watching this who's loaned to me, I'm sorry, but I'm so grateful.
Well, Ben, don't forget the unknown collector. Isn't there some of the pieces are unknown collector or anonymous or something?
Though yes, that is true. But I know who it is.
yeah. No, but I'm just saying,
you now, so we all will know.
Oh, yeah. There's an original cell from '67.
Oh, look at that!
Oh, look at that! That's cool.
From the episode where he battles the Viking guy.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
How much do you want for that one, Mike? How much is that?
Yeah, it's an original from '67. So.
And not
how much is that,
buddy? Oh, it's possible. I think Ben's guy's already contacted me. I was going to show Ben too my prized possession I just picked up. I have to confess it was from Heritage, but my Spider-Man 41 splash.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, it's my. I got to kick out the back of it where they're figuring out the name and everything like that. Look at that.
Oh, I love the back. Yeah, you see,
he's trying to determine different things about it, but I thought that was pretty cool. But
yeah, that's part of the thrill of the art.
Believe it or not, this is my holy grail I've been looking for 30 years, and it finally came up for auction. To all those people who said that I put it in the auction to buy it back to raise Romita prices, they're full of baloney. But I've been hunting this for 30 years and finally got it, so I was pretty. Well,
it worked. You did raise Romita prices by buying.
No, I think that had already taken place. I think his price raising had already taken place.
Yeah, that already happened. But I think the cover of that is in Eric's collection.
Yeah. I used to own that. Yep. So that's my recent baby collection.
Yeah, Berkey brought it to my house, and then I owned it for a while.
Yeah, the 41. I said that Marvel Comics 1 page, I don't know if you know, Ben, I found that in New York City back in 2002.
I had that was your discovery? So where? Where did you find that?
An artist named oh God, I'm trying hold on. Shoot. keep talking. We'll keep talking. God, I don't know why. He created that Daredevil for Charlton. Thunderbolt. He created Thunderbolt.
Somebody's going to say it in the comments.
No.
Well, keep going.
Yeah.
Keep
He was
going.
an artist.
Pete Morisi. Pete Morisi.
Okay. Yeah.
Artist Pete Morisi. I got the Marvel Comics 1 page. I got a Simon and Kirby Star Spangled 8 cover. Matt Grayboy Master Comics cover.
Oh wow.
And the Ditko first splash page to his first showcase book.
But
all those I got from back in August of 2002. When I got that Marvel Comics 1 page, I bought it. I thought it was an unpublished page. I didn't know it was published.
He must have been.
He was a sweet man. I always said he always reminded me of Uncle Joe from Petticoat Junction. He was a sweet guy. Him and his wife. Yeah, and believe it or not, they did the comic book artists. They did an article on me, and they go, "We'll give you a free ad for giving us Romita stuff." I said, "Okay." He sent me a letter to my PO box. I couldn't even. I thought his name was Itarisi. I couldn't even read his name. I didn't know who he was. I didn't leave a phone number. And over a course of a month, I figured out and realized who it was, and went through the phone books online and contacted him and went over his house and did a deal back in 2002.
That's such a you're so lucky, and it's such a
that survived.
Yeah, no, so lucky, and the opportunity to talk to guys from that generation, which is really gone now. The work that fans have done over the last 20, 30 years to talk to some of these folks before they left us. It's so important because, I was reading.
He died
the next year, Burke.
He died a year after I met him. Yeah.
That deal you made with him probably killed him.
I was going to say that, but you went there.
When we did the deal, I mean, at the time, again, when we did the deal and I made the offer to him, him and his wife go, oh my God, me and the wife need to talk before we decide if we'll do a deal. And they did the deal. So, but you
drove, didn't you? You drove out there, didn't you? You drove out there, didn't you?
I flew.
You flew.
I flew, but funny story. He lived in Staten Island, New York. I'd never been there. Funny story, though, just about history of stuff. I get a rental car because I go, I don't know where I'm going. And that guy goes, well, for $5 more, you can get a Galileo in your car. And I go, what's a Galileo? He goes, it's GPS. I go, what's GPS? And he goes, well, you can program it. I go, you're going to have to show me because I've never even heard of that. Thank God I paid $5 on the rental car and to get a GPS, one of the first generic GPSs. I'd have never found his house. Never. So that Galileo saved my butt. It was a funny story.
Yeah.
Back in 2002, yeah.
Yeah, that's a.
So if not for that GPS, you would not have that page in your exhibit.
I might not have found his house. I would not have found his house.
Galileo is helping you all over again.
Best $5 spent ever.
Yeah.
And then I drove to John Romita's house the next day to show him all the art. So I was all excited.
Well, to my knowledge, that is the only page that has surfaced from that historic book.
I bought it. I don't know if you know the story behind that. Just real quick, Marvel Comics 1, it was Motion Pictures Funnies Weekly.
Yeah.
I believe it was an 8-page story. Then they added the last 4 pages for Marvel Comics 1. Even though it was published in 1939, I was told that page was actually drawn in 1936. And it took that 3 years to get it published because it's smaller size on craft tin paper. That's why I looked through thousands of pieces of art he had, and I thought it was an unpublished timely page. But I said, if you look at the last panel, it says, and Submariner.
Right.
Look at his next adventure when he fights the white man. And I go, okay, this is really, really old.
Yeah.
We'll do a deal on that.
I just reread the first 3 or 4 Submariner stories for something I was doing research on, and they are wild. They're actually, I think he might be my new favorite Golden Age hero because the stories are so different from what other people were doing. I mean, it anticipates what's going to happen 20, 30 years later because Namor is such a dick. And he still is. Yeah, and he's still he's completely unchanged. But there is what it is actually, I realize it's the first time that the superhero narrative does a colonial allegory. Basically, it's this underwater people that have been wiped out by the surface dwellers, and he's the biracial character who is, his father is from the surface and his mother is from below. So phenotypically, he has the white skin, but all his people are blue. And it's a colonial metaphor. And he is essentially a noble savage figure, which I had never fully figured out before. He's the noble prince, but he's the prince from this threatened indigenous culture. So what they're playing with there is in pulp materials. You can go back to like Last of the Mohicans or something for the kind of thing that might have been circling around in Bill Everett's head when he did this. And he puts the sort of science fiction-y Man from Atlantis layer on top of a sort of a Last of the Mohicans kind of, colonial narrative. And you get the Submariner, and it's not like anything else at the time. And he says things like, he kills the white men, as he calls them. And he's utterly ruthless as well. That's the other thing that I hadn't quite taken in. That's the one way they've really changed him. Golden Age Namor in the first few issues is homicidal. He just kills.
Wow. See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he's pretty. Like there are two guys doing deep sea diving, and he kind of swims up to them and just decides, I'm going to break their. Yeah, I just want to break their oxygen tubes. Yeah,
right.
and
he's just hurting their equipment. He's not killing them. What are you talking about?
That's right. Yeah, my friend Douglas.
You misunderstand.
He wants them to swim like
go home.
My friend Douglas Wolk has created a little, after he was reading every Marvel book that he could, he created a little, it's almost a zine, I think it's called Nobody Died, in which there are scenes from various Marvel comics that he'd been reading from the 70s, most of them are, where it's clear that the original intent is that the villain did something pretty murderous, like people are killed. And then they have to decide in editorial, no. So there's a little caption explaining, they're still breathing, or it's like they look dead, but they'll be all right. All of these moments explain. Fortunately, the building was empty, and it's just
don't worry, kids. Everyone's fine.
But when you're working from the visual information alone, it's really clear. No, people died here. That's what happened.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
I said it's sort of like, I have the unpublished Spider-Man 97 cover. Like on the cover, Harry is holding a bottle of pills that are falling out. And then they put a piece of art over it. No, they're just going to make his hand open. Yeah. We'll do this, tell the story, but we can't show pills on the cover, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's and that relationship between what when you think about what they must have been having to think about every week as they're preparing something going forward, right? Stan has to be asking himself those kinds of questions every day.
Just like think about Conan. John Romita would always tell me, you got Werewolf by Night, you got the Frankenstein monster, and you got Dracula, and yet you can't show killing in any comic book,
Yeah, right.
So with those three monsters, and you got to get through 18 to 20 pages of excitement for a reader without showing death, that's pretty hard to do.
Don't forget the Living Mummy, Mike.
Right.
Even Morbius too. In the Living Mummy,
that's true.
Yeah. Well,
and Howard the Duck.
And Howard the Duck.
And Howard the Duck.
Well, he's very homicidal.
Yeah.
Exactly. You don't.
Yeah, it's a tough. Hey, one real quick thing I want to talk. Remember you were talking about Steve Ditko, Ben, about how he had everybody in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Just real quick, funny story. John Romita always tell me when Mary Jane and Gwen were in their heyday, Stan would actually get 5 fashion magazines and slam them on John's desk and say, "Here, keep Mary Jane and Gwen up to fashion."
Right.
And John would look at it going like, "I got to look up fashion magazines to draw my comic books." He goes, "Steve Ditko never had to do this." Steve Ditko never had to do this. But Stan wants me to gives me Glamour magazines and make Mary Jane and Gwen wearing the fashion of the day. So I have to go through Glamour magazines before I draw my comics.
Well, I've always been grateful that he did, because those knee-length boots that he put those heels in,
those crazy outfits.
That's particularly like the boots.
So
well, I'm sure after having a tumultuous relationship with Ditko, Stan was like, okay, now I can shape this thing here.
Yeah.
John's such a humble guy. I can get away with what I want to do.
Well, yeah, Ditko would have taken why you give me this? This is just going to go straight into the circular file down here.
Right. Well, John would even say, while he was still there, Ditko would just walk in, hand in his story, and leave. He didn't even want to talk to Stan,
Yeah.
Back in the day,
Yeah, no, these are, it was a productive tension for a long time.
Yeah. Everybody has their opinions,
Yeah.
Right.
And it broke decisively, clearly. It was just like there wasn't any repairing that
right.
damage, it seems.
Over time, yeah.
In fact, Ditko just seems to have got angrier and angrier. Ditko has this reputation for not speaking, and this isn't really true. Ditko wrote thousands and thousands of words for Robin Snyder for those very low circulation, essentially zines that Snyder was putting out.
Right.
I think because again, Ditko just didn't want to be edited. He didn't want anyone telling him what he could say or not say. And Snyder was going to just let Ditko be Ditko. But it means that Ditko said plenty. If you can dig those things up and find them, which isn't easy, they're not. And then when you read them, Ditko is very angry in some of those pieces. There's that one. It's Excelsior Backwards is the title. It's an essay, and it's the word Excelsior backwards, and it's just Ditko in Ditko's way, which is never entirely direct. Actually, it's always a little indirect and roundabout. But really having a go at Stan and Stan's language, Stan's choice of language, and how Stan would how Ditko feels Stan misrepresented that creative dynamic.
Right.
And it's that's quite late. I think it's from the 90s, possibly even the early 2000s. So
I was going to mention, even look into, I don't know if it is, Will Glenn would know. I had the splash page, like Iron Man 171 or something. Anyway, Ditko was going to draw a whole issue, and he did. But the splash page is Iron Man with his mask up, so you can see
and
he's drunk in a bar, and he refused to draw that splash page. He did pages 2 through 20, but Maurice Severin had to draw the splash. He goes, "I am not drawing a drunk Iron Man."
It's either Iron Man 160 or 162. Yeah.
Issue 161, 160. But he would not draw
162, somewhere around there.
Pages 2 onward, but he would not draw Iron Man drunk in a bar on the splash.
Well, I think by that point also it's very obvious that all the stuff that he was doing was the way that he was funding the comics that he was more interested in doing. Which are, to my mind, essentially, I mean, I don't want to offend any Ditko fans out there. I consider myself a Ditko fan, but I find a lot of that later work, it's kind of like libertarian chick tracts is what it's like. They're sort of fascinating they're fascinating, and they are, and they're also cranky and, fabulously idiosyncratic. They couldn't have come out of anybody else's mind. And
inaccessible also.
They're almost in a private language sometimes, and they're perverse, I think, in their values. I get the sense of being, I no doubt in my mind that Ditko is a highly principled individual or wedded to the idea of trying to be a sincere individual. But the commitment to a kind of implacable logic results actually in really peculiar ways of thinking.
I also find that I mean, just from the creator's point of view, like one of the unstated goals is to reach an audience, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like you otherwise, why are you doing what you're doing? You want. And then it becomes a discussion about how wide an audience you want to reach and what type of stuff you need to do in order to do that. But the drive of creators is to be understood, and it feels like Ditko is creating a medium where he doesn't want to be understood in a way.
There's part of that I admire, right? I admire the Ditko's like. I always think of it, the Kirby and Ditko, I think of them as the Shakespeare and Milton of superhero comics. Mm-hmm. And Kirby's got the huge canvas and can, you know, it's that sense of the Shakespearean grandeur of the project. You know, Milton is essentially, he doesn't care whether you like him, he wants your immortal soul. And there's a kind of, you know, the famous line is, you know, I will have fit audience, though few. I don't, you know, as long as the audience is, if the audience is small, that doesn't matter if they're discerning. Who needs the appreciation of the crowd? Those people are idiots, right?
I'm not selling me immortal soul if the price is right, but you know, it needs to be large.
Yeah. So there is a kind of you know, those are two different ways of being an artist, you know, and
absolutely. No, I think you're right about that, and it does make sense. Just
because Kirby never stopped, right? Kirby never lost faith in the commercial potential of comics.
Right. No. Every time he sat down, Kirby's like, "This is going to be the greatest selling." You know, like I know how to make comics, and I'm going to show you, and you know, this is a story you want to read. You know.
Right. But I'm going to elevate the medium. I'm going to push it to an area you've never seen before. I'm going to introduce God into the pages of a superhero comic, and we're going to have a debate about, you know, that's the like beyond good and evil. Right? I'll do that, or you know, I'll do a whole series about how humanity, you know, humanity was actually human life was started by aliens visiting the Earth thousands of years ago. So I'll take a high concept like that, right? But I will do it in a medium. I'll still do it through mainstream comics in a way that will
very commercial. It's a very commercial type of, you know, he's thinking of something that is like an interesting what if for people to jump on board. You know, I mean, that's.
Whereas Ditko is thinking like, okay, you know, this is going to be black and white. This is going to maybe, you know, like in a way, Ditko was looking for the comic book store audience before that audience even existed, in part of which is ahead of his time, right? Ditko's not really. Ditko doesn't belong with the underground tradition because of his politics, right? The last thing Ditko would want to be associated with is, you know, the Gilbert Sheltons and Robert Crumbs of the world.
Right.
You know?
No. Yeah, like they would not have a conversation.
But that was actually the only place in the 60s to try and sell something that wasn't on the newsstands, right? You're either going to sell on a newsstand or you're going to sell in a head shop. And there wasn't a lot of other places to sell. So Ditko's making comics that are not for the newsstand and that don't really fit in with a head shop audience. You know, 10 years later, when there are a lot more comic book stores, it's going to make more sense. But he's already, I think, at that point, it's almost too late at that point for you know, there's all of this stuff that unless you are a hardcore Ditko fan and you really are trying to seek this stuff out, it was hard to find. It's hard to find Mr. A, you know. So, and which actually I do kind of love. I like that stuff.
No, his commitment, you can't fault him for his commitment. I mean, he was with the medium until the very last of his days. I mean,
yeah.
And arguably the stuff that he was drawing even at the very end was lovely stuff. I mean, very, very interesting. I mean, his style. You always know a Ditko page when you see a Ditko page. There's no denying it. You know, whether you're talking about something from the 50s or whether you're talking about something that he did a few years ago. It's just you know, and a lot of artists, you know, I mean, I think if you look at people like even like Frank Miller, you know, and his Daredevil versus like the stuff he's doing now, you know, if you didn't know that the same artist drew that and you were just like shown two pictures, you would say, you know, those are two different artists, you know, but Ditko was always sort of himself.
It's true. He doesn't even seem to have had an apprentice period particularly. You know, when you look at really early Ditko, and in a way, I mean, that's the strength and the limit for me of Ditko, right? I could actually use a little growth. and when I look at at Kirby, right? I mean, what you see in Kirby, there is a juvenilia period. There is that period of early work where he's doing the Baroque panel design and all, and then he kind of settles into something that he has his most sort of naturalistic representational period in the 50s, really, the Boys Ranch material, where it starts to where he can draw realistically, to use a term I don't usually use, not very helpful descriptively, but he's got he's drawing characters in proportion. There is sort of space around them. For a lot of people, that's the best stuff. Like Gil Kane, I remember him saying that he thought that peak Kirby was actually that kind of period where his sense of proportion, design, and action were all just sort of perfectly balanced. And then throughout the 60s and into the 70s, he gets more and more Baroque and ornamental, and you can see the sort of the enjoyment of pattern making for the sake of it. The costumes, oh my God, those fabulous, fantastic. There's a page, I think Bruce Timm actually owns it. It's Maximus in full kind of imperial regalia from a fairly late issue of the Fantastic Four. So
right. Yeah, no,
great image of Maximus. Yeah, and it's like the costume conveys the sort of the florid insanity of the character.
Right. Yeah, it does. It does.
But it's also just, you could tell Kirby was just getting into making patterns on the page. There's a pure joy in abstraction at that point, pattern making.
Right, and speaking of abstraction, what's even more interesting is so he continued with that until he like through the 80s when he was doing his animation stuff, and then when he had the stroke and he started doing some post-stroke drawings, those really have an abstract aesthetic that are quite beautiful, like that, because he's still got it in terms of like organizing a page, but as he draws it, it doesn't come out quite the way that like his mind sees it, and you can see how the drawings are slightly warped, but they still they convey this like beautiful abstraction that is fascinating and beautiful, and still retains genius, and
that arc of a human, you can see a life, you can see in the work a person whose ability is always shifting with his vision is shifting as the more time he spends at the board, the longer he does it, the more there is an evolutionary process. Some things are abandoned and some things are sort of, and the fact that he could break with realism just sort of instinctively. This was, by the way, as a kid, as a younger reader of this material, I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I might have recoiled from that a little more because I wanted my comic art to approach my sense of the real, And,
right. No. I think Kirby is like more of an adult taste in a way, certainly like his work in the 70s and 80s, and I think you really sort of have to be an adult to appreciate him. I hear a lot of comic book guys come into the hobby saying like they hated Kirby, and like it's only like years later that they're like, I get it. Like he's a genius.
Yeah. So, and that's a sign of, there are artists. Sorry, say that again, Mike.
No, that's how I felt early on. I as a kid, I didn't like Jack Kirby that much, other than like on Devil Dinosaur and things like that. But I appreciate him way more than I did as a 13-year-old and 12-year-old.
I was the same way.
Yeah.
I didn't care for it early, but I love it later.
I didn't like his 70s work, but I loved his 60s work as a kid.
Funny story. I just wanted to share it. Oh, go ahead, Will. I'm sorry.
No, it's just the design, and maybe just because it was the beginnings of Marvel, it just had a charm to it that just
right. But you also had Stan Lee sort of like reeling him in a bit, and sort of giving you the Stan Lee shtick that made those characters so charming and so appealing. Sure. That was sort of like I'm sure if you had read like the Fourth World stuff at that age, you probably wouldn't have liked it as much because it just it was missing the comedy, the charm of Stan.
I think I read a little bit of Captain America in the 70s versus the 60s, and it just it was like
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's hard to it's hard to try that stuff until you get older. Yeah.
I was going to mention real quick. I don't know if you remember John Romita. I don't know if I have it on audio, but John Romita told me a story. He goes, do you know how? He goes, you want to hear something? A lot of people don't know. He would mention about how Jack would draw some of his crazy abstract backgrounds and things like that. He drew it on a piece of paper for me. He would draw like 8 blocks, and he would put an A, a B, a C, a D, an E, an F in a box. Then just off of that, he would just start doing different shadings in each one, and that's how he would come up. He would draw letters of the alphabet, and then just branch off of that and draw just crazy little designs. And they said that's how he would draw a lot of his machinery and different crazy backgrounds.
I love that because that is what's more abstract than a letter form. That's actually, there's.
Romita told me, he goes, that's what Jack would do with his backgrounds. I go, I would have never known that.
I never heard that, but that makes
fascinating.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. Yeah,
just just branch off of that for his backgrounds.
Yeah.
So we were having a little conversation before the show went live. We were sort of, Glenn was teasing Ben, saying, have you read all those books? And Ben was like, it helps my scholarly image. But in fact, listening to you, Ben, I think you have read just about all those books and maybe a few more.
Very true.
Ben, you don't need those props. You stand on your own 2 feet.
That's it. On your matted floor, your cushioned floor.
Well, I think I was also saying to you guys before we started that it is very humbling to be. I lucked into a job in a way that people who've been in the hobby and have had the enthusiasm for original art for as long as all of you had. You all could have curated this show. And none
of us have the British accent.
Yeah, that's it. That's that's my secret weapon, I guess.
It helps.
The residual appeal of imperialism. But there's also about the books and the props. This is a way of reminding myself what I don't know, right? I mean, this whole wall here, actually, which you can't see, is all comic studies material, and I buy it in part because I feel I ought to know the things that are in the books, and then there's never enough time to read everything. I buy books way ahead of my actual ability and time to read them. But I'm incredibly lucky in my job is to read, of course. That is actually also part of the job description.
So we if we curated your show, it would have been very different. It would have been we would have missed the boat. We would have curated a purely art show for based on what we understand is important in terms of like the history of Marvel Comics, but you created a show that's incredibly accessible for everyone, and that's much more important than just creating an art show.
It's kind of you to say, but I'll be honest, maybe that's where the producers were helping me out too, because I actually, and I'm very lucky they listened to me. I mean, there are, when I was talking to the organizers and the people who really are investing in the show, and they were saying, so we have access to the film archive and we can go with reproductions. We could have avoided a lot of expense to not have a lot of original art in the show, right? And a lot of people perhaps wouldn't even particularly have noticed, Right. There are people who go through the show. I stand and watch people go through it. And I love it when people stop and look at any part of it. I love it when they're with the Thing sculpture, and I love it when they're playing with the media screens, or But I love it when they stop in front of a piece of original art and have a moment where I see them having like, holy shit, somebody drew that. That's not a reproduction. That's a brush on a page, and or seeing on some of that Romita Senior stuff, you can see where he's gone in there with the knife to take out more pieces of and
Ben, I hate to cut you off, but like there's one thing about you that I love, and that is when we were discussing pieces for the show and what you wanted and where your vision was, and I was explaining to you how the technology of reproductions is so fantastic that once you put it behind museum glass, no one will know the difference. And you remember what you said to me? You were like,
No, I don't. No.
I will know the difference.
Right.
They have to be authentic, and I have to have the feeling that what we're putting on is an authentic show. Because I was suggesting that, you know, if you couldn't get certain pieces, that I knew where certain pieces were, and we could perhaps talk with the owners and get reproductions. And you were like, well, I don't want to go down that road.
Yeah,
you know,
no, I really don't. No,
and kudos to you for not listening to me.
Well, I was about to try and give kudos to the producer of the show, particularly Christoph Schulz, who did listen to me, and he wasn't particularly a comics enthusiast. He was someone who is a very astute. He's a very astute businessman who recognized that there would be interest in a Marvel show. He's also, you know, very culturally aware person. His previous show, I'd seen it in Munich, that he'd organized, was a graffiti show where they had brought in 60 different graffiti artists from all over the world and given them space to play with. And they'd made the art objects there. And then they had built a gallery that was like a city. It was called Magic City. And there are different soundscapes. I mean, this is stuff that's the way Christoph thinks. But
when I met him at the dinner that you guys had for us in I was trying to talk him into the idea of that you guys should actually be acquiring artworks, you know, like at auction, or, you know, for the show, and that it would, you know, it would be cheaper for you guys to literally purchase the objects, and then at the end of the run, like whenever that run was, you just sell the objects, and you actually will make, you know, that they continue to escalate. Clearly, the pieces that you're picking, you know, they would pay for themselves, and you'd probably make a profit.
Yeah, when we did go back and forth on this, I mean, probably at this point, we had that was something that came up as a possible discussion, and we have bought a couple of pieces.
Right.
I've tried to keep it very much at the lower end,
right.
Partly because you couldn't do it at the scale, right, that I wanted to do. I mean, we have like 60 or 70 pieces of original art in the show, and many of them are, you know, they're key moments in the history of the company and the character.
Sure. No, you couldn't do it with key moments. You could do it with examples, though.
Yes, you could, and you could do it with key artists and key characters. You can, if you're not worried about the story moment. I wanted this show. I wanted the show to stand out from any other Marvel Museum show that I had heard about or seen. In that, I wanted that the moments that maybe people have seen in the movies to actually be able to refer them back to a comic book, like that Spider-Man 122 cover. This is a nice.
Yeah, that's a fun thing. Yeah.
The 122 cover with the Green Goblin's, you know, face on it is right next to a case that has the mask that Willem Dafoe wore from the first of the Tobey Maguire movies. So, you know, so the choice of art was very. Again, I wrote that fantasy wish list, and it worked out for a lot of the material. But Christoph was able to see that would make the show different. That if we had, that there may be, you know, 90% of the public coming through might not care that much about the original art. They're there to see the Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man armor. They're there to see the Chadwick Boseman Black Panther costume. They're there to get the selfies, you know, which is great. I put all that stuff in there for those people.
Right. But the exhibit overachieves. It's like you go in there expecting, that's what you're expecting. You're expecting that, and then you get an experience that's mind blowing. You know,
it's a total experience, and it is more than you expect. And I would just say, Ben, what you didn't mention, I mean, at least for the Franklin Institute, which is sort of my home base, but you know, that was the most popular exhibit that they've ever shown, if I remember correctly, from ticket sales, and it outdid Jurassic Park and the Egyptian exhibit and all the other wonderful things that they brought there. But the Marvel exhibit outperformed, and the proof is in the pudding. People wanted to see it, and you guys even extended the exhibit by a few weeks.
Yeah, and I think even in the opening in I haven't seen the show in the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn. I wish I had it. Of course, we haven't been traveling.
Yeah, none of us could go.
But apparently people there are going, people who are not, that people aren't necessarily flying to the show, but we, once we opened the show and they had this very controlled opening where you have to check in online initially so they can keep the overall number of people through the gallery low enough that social distancing can happen. And obviously masks are required. But people have been going and it's a, this last year has been so difficult for so many people. And,
Sure.
Those of us who have been lucky enough not to lose our jobs have found ourselves just busier and busier as we try to figure out how to work from home and how to recreate experiences online. And museums, of course, have been terribly hard hit. And it's along with, and then there are just people who losing their jobs in their homes. So it's been the thought that the show was there and was locked up and no one could see it was just heartbreaking to me.
Right. Yeah.
The
That was.
fact that it opened at all and that people are able to go, that we've been able, and that people have supported that Will and Glenn have artworks in the show that people are going to be happy to see. That
Are people staying 6 feet away from my artwork, by the way? I meant to ask. People are social distancing?
Yeah, I believe so. I think there's
I think the frame it's in is pretty safe. No, but something else I wanted to mention, Ben, is that, as a lender, I mean, I was introduced, to you by Glenn, and we got to know each other a little bit on the phone, and I was sort of like a bit skeptical, and you put all the lenders at ease, and even like with this lockdown with COVID in Detroit, I mean, you stayed in contact with us and assured us, hey, security is tight, and there were additional insurance contracts sent out, and I mean, it's just you provide a comfortable experience for lenders that makes us want to continue to support, and a lot of the lenders you have met through sort of word of mouth or introduced by another collector, and that's, I mean, I think that's important, the relationship building behind the scenes. Even when most of the artwork is sent in, and because I'm driving distance to Philly, I was like, oh no, I want to hand deliver. So you made a call and you said, okay, that's fine, and you had me take it to sort of this very high security offsite, but near the museum place where they frame. They frame, and I mean, you're familiar with this place. They frame all kinds of historical documents. They were very friendly. They were very fascinated by the art when I brought it in. They, people from other departments, they wanted to see it, but just the total experience, I think is great, and people don't know that, but I think they should.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're willing to put up with our idiosyncratic collectors' behavior and mentality, and we love you for it.
I share it. I mean, I have a couple of, as you pointed out, my Amazing Fantasy 15 is in the show, and this is much less valuable than some of the more valuable artworks in the show, but it's the most valuable book I own, and I wouldn't want anyone to sign a contract or lend anything that I wouldn't do myself, and I think that makes it easier to reassure people. Also, though, I should shout out for the people who supported my shows right at the beginning, who'd never heard. I mean, Ethan Roberts has passed away now, but with Ethan was opened the door, and other people were willing to lend when they heard he was lending. For my very first show, and I'll always be grateful to him for that, because I was having a really hard time getting anyone to lend initially, and I understand why. It's a museum in Oregon. I'm trying to. There are a lot of people I'm trying to reach. Are like, they're in LA, they're in the East Coast, so I get that. They've never even heard of the place that's trying to get them to lend the art. They never heard of me. I'm not a big collector. I have a tiny handful of pieces, most of which I was given. So,
Ben, what can just for those who are watching the show that are like hoping to come see if they're not like close to Detroit or whatever, what you want to like talk a little bit about the next the next place that the show is going? Or
Sure, it's
There's a couple places if you can.
Yeah, next venue is going to be the MSI in Chicago. That's actually one of our biggest city venues for the remaining sort of American leg. The idea is that the show will keep going and go international within, well, probably, COVID has delayed everything. I don't think that the producers are going to be able to recoup from the Henry Ford. I think it's just been, like so many businesses, so many creative opportunities, so many people's lives, it's just been impossible. But Chicago, I hope that by the spring, people will be feeling a little more at ease about going back into public spaces. And I think that's a great venue. I mean, it's one of the great American cities, and it's a great museum in Hyde Park. So I'm very excited about that possibility. We're going from
that's in March. Is that when that starts?
Yeah, we open in March, and then close in September, which means probably October, November. We open in Columbus, Ohio, which is a real comics town, of course. I mean, that's when we're going to go. Sorry, you cut out.
Mike's house in Ohio. We're all after we're all invited to go to Mike's house.
That's about 2 hours away. I'm about 2 hours.
Berkey.
Oh well, this is we will find to meet.
We're gonna have a Romita party at Berkey's.
We can have a cookout and have dinner in my Spider-Man room. Sure.
Yeah, we're gonna have dueling Spider-Man statues, and
that's what I suggest we do, Ben. When we have the opening in Columbus, we go and we see your exhibit, and then we all pile in. Well, hopefully we can at that point. We can all go into a big minivan and head over to Mike's and look at the Romita Spider-Man, basically the entire run from original.
That would be awesome.
That would be that
would be fun. I would love to have everybody.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I actually really do. I really hope we can do something like that. That's that
would be great. Good.
Ben, when is the show in Columbus? I mean, after Chicago, but
open towards the end of 2021. So we'll be looking at late fall, early winter 2021. And then, and of course, Ohio State University is there, and there's actually some of the best comic scholars in the country are there. So there'll be a real opportunity to have some good academic programming attached to the show as well, I think.
Right.
And then we have not confirmed the venue after that, although I know that there will the hope will be another large city. I'm not sure if that will be the last U.S. stop or not, but within the next, there may be one more. That may be the last U.S. stop, and then we go international. And lots of venues have been mooted, and nothing is confirmed. This is to tell you the truth. As I say, I fell into this. I'm not a trained curator and not a museum person by training. I'm an English professor, so. I didn't realize how crazy this is. I have no idea really how touring museum shows ever happen, because there's a sort of a chaos factor involved in that the timing, first the museum has to want the show. Second, they have to want the show when the show is available. And they all plan their schedules, usually a year and a half to 2 years out. So getting a show locked in, there's this sort of window where the locking in happens, and it's never, you never know where it's going to be 2 years from now. That's still sort of in the chaos zone. You might know where it's going to be 12 months from now. And then when you're in that place, you're thinking about the next, sort of two venues again. And and you go back to places that have said not now, but try later. It's just it's amazing that it ever happens. I'm shocked that museum shows run sometimes as long as they do. But this one could go a very long time. I don't see the public losing interest.
not the way it's set up. And I mean, I really, it's the only stumbling block has been COVID. You know, if not for COVID, I think. I mean, we all would have traveled to Detroit, and that would have been a whopping success. And you know, it's just a shame. But I mean, I guess everybody has to. Every industry is experiencing that, so you have to make the best of it. And hopefully you guys can hang in there, because you've got a really, really great thing, and obviously everybody wants to see it. You know, for a multitude of reasons. It's
been one of the great opportunities of my professional life, really. I mean, I didn't see it coming. It wasn't something when I became a professor of literature that I ever imagined happening, and I still sometimes can't quite believe that it happened, and that I've been able to meet the people that I've met through doing it, or that the number of people who would show up and enjoy it. You know, that's a really thrilling thing when you know, thousands of people came that first night in Seattle. And
Right.
when thousands of people are walking through something that you know you had a hand in pulling this together. And again, I feel like it's only appropriate to just keep saying this is the people I've worked with. I've been so fortunate. The design team has been incredible. The lenders have been so generous. The producers have been visionary in their willingness to listen to me as a kind of a total, you know, someone with not a lot of a track record of experience in the museum world, and to trust me and to trust my knowledge of Marvel, and to believe that the public would like all of this stuff. You know, trust me, you don't just want the costume and the statue. You want that piece of art too. And then they get the feedback from the audience coming through, you know, and there are people who come through and say, oh my God, there's the Death of Gwen Stacy pages. Oh my God, there's the Iron Man alcoholism cover. Oh my God, there's Steranko's Hulk annual cover. You know, I mean, I used to have that on a t-shirt. And, you know, people just are and almost, you know, when you're taking, I took Joe Quesada and C.B. Cebulski around the show early on at Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And you know that it's good when someone like Joe Quesada is going, oh,
Oh yeah, no,
I've seen that. I didn't know you had that, right? That Marvel 1 page, for example, right? You know.
Right. And that's by the way, that's another thing that was really special about the exhibit was in Philadelphia. You had those panels where you know, Quesada and Cebulski like would discuss not just Marvel history, but like, you know, the exhibit and take questions and interact. And so it was like, I mean, you're getting the history of Marvel, and you were getting like, you know, the editorial team now, you know, and I mean, it's what more could a fan ask for?
Felt like a convention. You know what we could have asked for? The acrobats that they had swinging in the the opening. You know, when you come into the Franklin Institute, they had acrobats. So,
I wanted a take-home bag where I could just sort of pick the art that I wanted and put it in my bag and take it home.
That's your stuff when you get it back in a couple of years. You know.
I was so tired that night. I always felt like I was hallucinating. You know, I mean, it was again surreal. You know, I'm running essentially like a con panel with Annie Nocenti and Danny Fingeroth and C.B. Cebulski and Joe Quesada under, you know, like a 60-foot tall statue of Ben Franklin, who is seated like Kirk in the chair on the deck of the Enterprise there. Right. You know, I mean, it's like, and the lighting is changing in the room all the time. And I swear the expression on Ben Franklin's face was changing because of course I was on West Coast time, and they'd had me get up at 3 a.m. to be there early for some filming to promote the show on local TV, because the cameras all come in really early before everybody else shows up, right? So I was completely jet lagged, had been up since about 3. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening. I'm trying to run this panel, and the light is changing the room, and Ben Franklin is winking at me. It's like it was this weird, like the statue is moving. And
no, that's when you hit warp drive. That's what happened.
That's right. Yeah, I just like, okay, I guess we're going with this. I'm not sure what's going to come out of my mouth, fortunately, it was a very, it's a room full of fans. There's a room full of people who, again, I'm not, how you'd have to work to spoil this material for people. It's like, somebody says
you're very modest, but I mean, look, I'm sure a lot of people could have screwed it up royally, but you put on something extraordinary. So
yeah, if this was a novice effort with your so-called lack of experience, I'm scared to see what a couple years of experience.
Yeah, no, I'm ready for that vision of the Fantastic Four in 2025 in Hong Kong.
I've never given up on a 3-dimensional Kirby machine. I bring it up every single time we have an opportunity to rethink a production meeting. I don't know if it will ever happen, but if anyone can build a 3D Kirby machine, it's the design team from Studio TK in Berlin. Those guys can, if anyone can do it, they can do it.
You should put the vision to phase through it too. You should have like the vision of somebody phase through it.
I think by the end of these shows, we're going to give you the rank of colonel.
You guys are too kind. It's really been.
Got that one, Bill?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, you are. But so, Ben, this has been fantastic. I think we should have you on again because I mean, we didn't even show up. I mean,
every time the show maybe goes to another city, if you have new props or something.
Yeah, I'll do original art with you guys anytime. I would be delighted.
Sure.
I think we should, the next time we're all at the show, right? Maybe we do a quick 15-minute segment from the show. How about that?
Right. Well, we were talking about doing something in Columbus to go to see the museum there. It might make a lot of sense to try to time that around the time this show is in Columbus, and then we can also do the trip to Berkey's house. And I don't see why we couldn't make a weekend out of it and invite a lot of other collectors to be there as well. I think
that would be terrific.
We would have a lot of opportunity. This is a year from now. It's a little more than a year from now. So we could really plan a weekend around it, and I think
Mike, I want to sit at the kids' table.
No kids' table at this show.
I want to sit at the kids' table.
And of course, if we manage to get back to, there are sort of dream cities that I would love to be, and I actually love it if the show would come to LA, and I'd really like to see that happen. As you know, Dave Mandel was a huge supporter of the first version of the show in Seattle, and I think he would come back on board probably for an LA show. I shouldn't speak for Dave, I don't know, but I imagine if it were the right venue and in his home city.
What about Lucas?
Lucas Museum.
To be opening soon.
God's ear, that would be wonderful if it happened, and I think they would have. They would be glad that they took the show. I'm not sure if museums have reopened in California.
Not yet. But by the time, but Lucas isn't even open yet. So they're in the process of building still. They were supposed to open 2022, I think, at this point. I'm not sure, but I imagine you guys still. There's a possibility you guys still might be in the U.S. By the time they open.
Your last stop, hopefully.
I don't know. I actually don't make the decisions about where the show goes.
Right.
This is my wish list since I live in LA.
Yeah, well, we all wish for it hard enough, and I would love to have opportunities to bring in more collectors, or to bring back collectors who've loaned to earlier versions of the show. I think that my sense now that I've got a better sense of what's out there and with whom, the possibility of bringing together a version of the Marvel show that really that lives in memory. To do a show that maybe we've come close to doing that already, but I know what we haven't been able to bring together all at once. And one of the things about doing the EC show was being able to walk around, and there was because I had Glenn Bray and Eric Roberts lending, we could put the color study for the cover of Mad #1, and then the finished original art for Mad 2, 3, and 4, all on one wall, right? And I don't think that's ever happened before or since. I don't think anyone has seen those pieces of Americana all on one wall. And I didn't get the right group of collectors together all at the same time. You could do that with Marvel, and to make a version of a show that is, maybe you never get to do again anywhere else in the world, but maybe we could do that in LA, and it would be.
I'll help you in any way I can to put something like that together. I'm happy to be your point person in LA. And,
well, I really appreciate it. The help and support of the collecting community is essential. I mean, there's no way that someone like me can do something like this without the generosity of the lender. And we've had. I understand this is people's carefully that you're all as collectors. You are a curator. You're all curators. You curate your own collections, and people, when a piece is missing, people know. That it's that it's gone, and so it's a big ask, but I think people like that sense of, watching people walk around the show and seeing there's their piece, and there's that Albert Moy piece, but this is the only time that they've all been in the same room.
Well, as an owner,
Real.
you can enjoy your art home, but you can't appreciate it through the eyes of others. And when your art is hanging in a venue where you can sort of nonchalantly walk around and see what people's reactions are to the artwork you've lent, that's a pretty special moment. It gives back in unexpected ways. So
I remember watching Chuck Costas at the, I think it was I can't remember whether it was Philadelphia or Seattle. I think it was Seattle, right? But that piece that you showed earlier, Bill, that John Byrne, Joe Sinnott calendar piece with all of those Marvel characters on it, that's a piece of belongs to Chuck. And I remember he was just standing kind of casually, not too far away from it, watching people come up to it. And so many characters are on it that everyone stops to look at that one because they want to see how many they can identify. In fact, I that we'd make a little key, so next to it, it's got the names of every single characters that have a silhouette of reproduction. So you could see how many Marvel characters can you name? And he's just smiling, just like watching people coming up and looking at his art and playing that game, immediately playing that game. So those are.
It's unfortunate that Chuck can only name 3 of those characters, but other than that,
it's not sure if the Punisher in there.
All the Zek characters he knows.
The help.
He's always amazed when some little kid knows more characters than
Chuck,
he does.
Chuck, actually, Dave introduced me to Chuck, and I mean, these are. I feel like I've made lasting friendships out of this because these are there are shared enthusiasms that, and then you realize other people actually care as much about this stuff as you do. I mean, I think that's the importance of a collecting community, because by ourselves it can feel a pretty isolating experience a lot of the time. Certainly when I was growing up.
Right. Well, it's a little surprising to look around at in your 50s and go, this that we loved as children is still so vibrant and exciting and in the minds of so many adults. Because imagine trying to have this conversation with an adult when you were 12. I mean,
I tried. It didn't work.
Yeah. No, I remember. And people think of comics as being for kids, but in my experience growing up, they weren't even that much for kids. Yeah. I didn't. Most of the kids that I went to school with were obsessed with sports. There were way more Cardiff City fans who, as far as I'm aware, never made it into the first division. but there were way more, soccer fans than there were comic book fans. I remember having a conversation with a guy named Chris Bowden, who went on to become one of my best friends in school, about Spider-Man one day, and both of us realizing we both read these British Marvel reprints, and it was like, there's a moment in a really great Charles Schulz Peanut strip where Charlie Brown goes to summer camp and really doesn't want to go, and he's there and he's being very Charlie Brown about it. He's very isolated, and he meets what is the name of the kid? Is the kid with the dark curly hair, usually wears a cap. I'm going to blank on his name, but they start talking, and the other kid says, "I don't know if I like camp very much. I feel kind of lonely here." And Charlie Brown goes, "Friend!" It's like there's this, oh, that's it. You feel like I do. And Schulz had an incredible sensitivity, I think, to what it feels like to feel like the one person who doesn't fit in. I think that's actually kind of part of the magic. One of the things the internet has given the collecting community as well. It not only allowed me to connect with collectors to try and borrow from people, but it's allowed people to form this community that is bonded around the art. Comic art fans is a real, it's a gift. It's because otherwise, we'd see one another, once a year at San Diego or something, and this is right. And the art would just disappear. Right. But instead, you can go to that website and see what people have.
So I wanted to quickly mention, because we usually take a couple questions. So Rich, Mel, and Ray all mentioned you having a show in Canada, which I don't think they're aware that you absolutely had a show in Canada.
Yeah. We did a show in Edmonton.
Quickly tell us a little something about that one.
Yeah, the Edmonton show is where we went after Philly. It was one of the shorter stops. I think the run was only a few months. It was at the Telus Museum there. That's actually the city that John Byrne's family moved to when they moved from the UK. So apparently Byrne went to the high school just down the street from that museum. So I remember as I was walking through that show, realizing that for that particular iteration of the show, and this was with your help, Will, there's a lot of Byrne in that show, and that was a particularly nice thing to be able to say as I was walking around and showing people, this to be able to say actually a guy who grew up here. Really had a hand in some of this very significant work and these key moments. I don't know
if you remember this, Ben, but when I was walking around Edmonton, there were a lot of like 60-something-year-old women in like hot pants walking around, like asking if like John Byrne was there.
He's gonna come.
They were hoping to get another shot with him after all these years.
Glenn, you've not given me a pretty picture to curl up and go to sleep tonight. Not the prettiest picture.
You
don't remember that, Ben? Okay.
I don't know. I'm drawing a blank, but
maybe they had the psychedelic lights there too, and Ben kind of just blanked out on that part. Good for him.
We had I guess there's some things that were unique to that. Of course, we had an Alpha Flight wall there, an Alpha Flight display, which was just done for the Canadian version of the Marvel show. And I had a little mini history. One of the nice things that Marvel have been willing to do is allow me to acknowledge that there is a world of comics outside of Marvel. So at the very beginning, when we're talking about sort of the prehistory of the superhero and talk about the pulps a little bit and so on, and at that part of the show, I wanted to do a little sidebar on Canadian superheroes, because it's an interesting story about, during World War II, the Canadian government passed laws banning the import of American comics in this quite populist move, which starts this native Canadian comics industry to temporarily replace the loss of the American material, you know, and there were still sort of little factoids about Canadian comics that I wanted to sort of get in there on that wall. And Marvel let me do all this. And of course, the longest running, still I think the record for the longest running Canadian comic is Cerebus the Aardvark. And there are a couple of references to, obviously he played with Marvel superheroes, you know, in a satirical way. The Wolveroach and the Moonroach. So I got a reproduction of, you know, copyright Dave Sim, it says on it in the corner, of the Wolveroach, very small, you know, literally about this big. But I was able to put it on this infographic, or have the designers put it on the infographic. So there's a little piece of Canadian comics history with the Wolveroach there on the wall with the big Alpha Flight display. And that I think I was probably one of the only, I might have been the only person who got a little bit of delight out of seeing that there. But you know,
it's the Steve Ditko in you.
Yeah, the Steve Ditko in me. Well, you know, I mean, that's those superhero parodies were, you know, they were just so on the mark.
Well, Disney is actually going to release the Wolver Mouse now to replace Wolverine and Mickey Mouse. So that'll, you know, you may want one of. I think I have the first original drawing of that. I'll be happy to donate it for the next show.
The Wolver Mouse.
The Wolver Mouse.
Disney's going to want it back now.
Yeah. You guys are tireless. We've been.
Yeah, no, I know. We've harassed you for a long time. Normally we cut it, but you're such an engaging guest. We can't let you go.
I mean, I could talk about this stuff all night. I really could. But
now let's do a part two, because I can tell you're starting. You already had a long day before you came to us. So
this is true, and I was teaching via Zoom a little earlier today, and teaching teaching horror comics today. So it was a good day. But
well, we're so excited that you agreed to come on and share you know, your knowledge of everything Marvel and everything. It's just a joy.
And that's true. We actually were when Glenn made the suggestion. I said, "Why the hell didn't I think of that?" Of course, Ben.
Yeah, no, because Ben's awesome. We love you, Ben.
No, we were excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully you'll, even though we kept you, you know, past your bedtime, you'll agree to come back someday.
You bet. I would love to come back and you know, this is. I mean, it's great to talk about Marvel, but I'm a fan of the whole medium. So
we didn't even get to see your really cool Jack Kirby Rawhide Kid page, which is, by the way, awesome.
Oh, thank you.
You gotta like at least put that one up before we say goodnight.
I will. I'm gonna put that up right now.
Panels. Yeah, look at that. Look at that panel.
Isn't that great?
That is like one of the best Rawhide Kid pages I've ever seen. Everything is awesome.
It is my one Kirby page, and I have Albert Point to thank. I bought that from Albert 12 years ago, maybe.
It's the perfect page. I mean, it really is. It has everything.
It gave me it's one of those wonderful Kirby choreographed fight scenes. I particularly love that panel though, because it shows what Kirby can do kind of as an expressionist and still look like a realist. Like that, one of the kid's legs looks like it might be longer than the other. And if he were to stand up, his thigh would be, you know, 4.5 feet long. But you don't really notice, you know, what it gives, it just gives you the sense of the movement that's going to come out of the next panel. You know, it's
the whole page is wonderful from like the very first panel, like the way he's standing, and then you know, from his opponent's point of view. And I mean, it is just like the perfect panel page.
Yeah,
and that does it, Glenn. Slap leather. I mean, that's perfect.
Yeah. Slap leather, and my guns don't feel right.
Yeah.
So if Ben, if you want to put that one in your will, if you want to put that one next, you know, put my name next to that one.
It is my one Kirby page, and I am very proud of it.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and but I'd have at most, a dozen things, and they all, most of them, they all have the great personal value. To me, this is one of the few I think that other people might covet. I suppose the other one is that Chaikin cover. I actually think that's the other. If you have a picture of that one there, Bill, I'll show that one off.
Oh yeah.
And Mike, of course. That was so. Those were both. If you believe this, these are both gifts. As an English professor, I'm not buying a lot of original art. The work that I most covet is beyond my financial means. But Howard's a good friend, and I talked to him on the phone a lot. And when he was doing Satellite Sam with Matt, who is also a friend, Matt lives quite nearby in Portland. That I saw that cover, and before the book came out, and I said to Howard, "Oh, I want that." He said, "Oh, it's too late. Matt's already said he's having that." So I thought, okay, but there are so many. It's a beautifully Chaikin's sense of design is so exquisite. And it's got, as an American flag fan from back in the 80s. Howard's fabulously fetishistic garter belts. And if I wanted a Chaikin page, I wanted a Chaikin page with one of those garter belts on it, and it's all there. It's a number one. So anyway, I figured, okay, Matt, obviously the man who wrote the book is going to get that. So I told Matt, I wanted that, but I guess you're getting it first. And Matt said, "Oh yeah, that one's mine." So anyway, a year or two went by. I turned 50. And I had a birthday party. I don't usually have a party for my birthday. I usually pretend it isn't happening, but 50 is one, and Matt Fraction came down from Portland and gave me that.
Wow. Fantastic gift.
Yeah. So that's, Matt, thank you. And of course, this is, my wife and I are both, huge fans of Howard as a human being. We just think he's a terrific person. So it means a lot to have that piece.
It's funny if you're looking at that Chaikin cover, you don't realize her right shoe, her heel is on his hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not looking at it closely, that's pretty funny.
No, the design, it's the storytelling dynamic. That's such an eye-popping cover on the shelf, it was, and the other piece was, which is also, I love the Avengers. I love the old TV show,
Right.
Avengers, and Mike Allred is one of my best friends in the world. He lives here in town. Pre-COVID times, we would get together every Friday night and do karaoke together. Believe it or not, Mike is a big karaoke guy, and so am I. When
I'd like to be a fly on the wall for that.
we harmonize on Beatles songs, but Mike, I had just recently moved. My family, we had recently moved, and Mike brought that piece over one day as a housewarming gift. So that is at the end of my corridor. So that might really, that's a I haven't bought a lot of the art that I love the most because I can't afford the art that I love the most. But these gifts from artists who I admire and creators who I admire, it just adds a whole new level of I would never sell these pieces because they are, the personal association is just so strong. And
no, you can't. I mean, when somebody gifts you something, it's there's a huge attachment there.
Yeah. And the two creators that I just, in the 80s, reading American Flag, the sense of design, Howard's sense of design on that book, he really was. I would put that alongside things like Love and Rockets and what Miller was doing in Dark Knight, and as sort of really making me think again about what you could actually do on the page. The way that Howard expresses what it is like to live in a media-saturated universe, in a silent and still medium of comics, the sense of noise and motion that he's able to convey in those issues of Flag, I think, I think it's a pivotal book, and the importance of the place of that book in the history of the medium. I think it's underappreciated. But what Jakin did in the first 12 issues of American Flag is redefining of the medium in terms of his sense of design. The material is quite, he's a pulpy storyteller, but what he's doing on the page with sound and vision, it's just overwhelming. And then Mike, for me, in the 90s when comics were going through a very grim and gritty period, what Mike Allred was doing with Madman was reminding me that comics could be fun. And when I was in my 20s, long before I met Mike, huge fan of Madman, and it's the way that he bring in the B-movie stuff and the pop art material, and it's that he obviously that he was an artist in the 90s, but that he clearly loved Kirby and that was coming out in the work.
Yeah, no, I love Mike. Mike was my my cover artist when I wrote Jersey Gods for Image Comics, and which is basically like Orion, my version of Orion gets married and moves to New Jersey.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And Mike just did these amazing covers. The first issue cover was the two main characters racing along the Jersey Turnpike. It was just this fabulous cover that he did. So I mean,
he can hit it out of the park sometimes with those covers. His sense of design and his sense of playfulness.
Right.
There's a real warmth to.
Actually, I have it right here.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, that's what a clean line. His ability to give weight to the limbs, like those legs, just with an outline. I find that's a kind of cartooning there that I just my hat is just off. This to be able to do that in black and white with just the weight of an exterior line. I think Jaime Hernandez has that skill as well. I think it's a skill that he and Mike share.
Wow, that's up around exit 11 or 10 or something.
I
had to send him reference of the Jersey Turnpike, and so he put that together. And what's interesting is Dan McDade, who was my artist on the series, I really wanted this as an art collector. I wanted obviously the first issue cover, and I hadn't talked to Mike about it after he had drawn it, and he had talked with Dan McDade, and they agreed to do like an art swap where like Dan was going to get the first cover, and Mike was going to get a piece of Dan's art, and I was like, oh my god, like I should have talked to these guys and explained to them like how much this mattered to me. So I explained it to Dan, and Dan and I made a deal for it. But and Mike was okay with my doing that, given how much I wanted it. But
sure, Mike is seriously one of the most decent people I have ever met. One of the most open.
Absolutely,
I love looking, and I don't have it because I don't. He did the cover of my book, my Do the Gods Wear Capes. But I can't find it. I don't have a copy of my own book on the shelf here. I don't know.
It's the one you're missing.
It's all up here.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we have. I'm sure we've kept you longer than you anticipated, and you probably want to have a shot of whiskey and forget this ever happened.
Or at least get off your feet.
Yeah. It's true. It's been a long day. It's a pleasure, a real joy. There it is. There's Mike's cover for my book. Thank you.
I had that loaded up in case we ever were going to talk about it. So
all right, there you go.
I came prepared.
Full circle.
Yeah. That I was so happy when he turned that around for me so quickly. It was a last minute thing. I wasn't crazy about the cover that the publisher had sent to me, and I asked them if I can, if I'm willing to pay for it myself. Can I have my choice of cover artist? And they were just like, well, yeah, as long as if you're going to pay for it, I guess that's okay. So I called Mike, and Mike is always busy, of course, but he turned that around for me really quickly, and it's of course Laura's color job as well. So it's
Right.
Yeah, it was. I gave him a little description of what I needed and the themes of the book, and there it is.
Very cool.
He's amazing.
Yeah, he's just a lovely man.
I actually had him do his version of Spider-Man #1 for me, which I guess we'll save it for another show because I don't know how to dig it up right now. But
oh yeah, that would be cool.
I'll send you a scan of it, Ben, so you can see it.
Please, yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me and for letting me go on and on and on.
Oh, such a pleasure.
It really was.
Great to be with you, Ben. If we can't be with you in person,
and this is eventually we will all be able to get together and let's pray to the gods of art and comics that maybe we get to really put on the biggest show yet.
Get rid of this COVID so we can go back to fun times.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Well,
all
thanks.
right. Well, I guess we should say goodnight and
thanks for listening and tuning in, everyone.
Yeah.
All right.
Stay safe,
everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.